I'm ready to call the meeting to order at 6:02 on April 29th. As we begin, I'll just acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional territories of the Coast and Strait Salish people, specifically the Lekwungen-speaking people known today as the Songhees and the Esquimalt First Nations, and recognizing that their connections to these lands continue to this day. Up first, we have approval of the agenda. If we can get that moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. We're on to special meeting matters. We're having a meeting today because we have a lot of work going on, and so we're trying to squeeze in a couple of extra meetings to over the next month or so, just to deal with items that we can't quite fit into our regular meeting schedule, or where we want special meetings for community input. But first up on the agenda, we have infill housing options for neighborhoods, a project charter, and this is a new process for us to undertake for these kind of projects. And with that, I'll introduce Mr. Anderson, our Director of Building and Planning, to introduce.
Thank you, Your Worship, members of council, and thank you for this opportunity. It is really a great opportunity for us to sort of look at a new tool or method that we might use for us to sort of communicate and ensure as we go along, we understand how a project is moving through its slated process. What I'd like to do this evening is just provide a bit of an introduction to what you have before you in the report, particularly around the project charter that relates to infill housing options for neighborhoods. So council may recall that as part of the 2017-18 strategic plan, this initiative to review a range of options was considered by council, and as part of a larger housing framework that we see this initiative fall within. That was approved as part of that session, and further direction with respect to this initiative was provided in the 2021 budget, when council did provide budget to allow for this project to move forward. As part of that direction around that budget discussion, there was direction to include townhouses within one of the potential housing forms that we review as part of this infill housing options project. And the project at that time is contemplated to be completed in the first quarter of 2022. So here we're now seeking to initiate this infill housing options project, and it's through a council approved charter that details governance matters with the intention to ensure council expectations for the project are well defined at the outset. And council may recall that we've had a similar exercise with some previous projects that in the past may have been referred to as a terms of reference, but we're really talking about a content similar in terms of how we move forward with this. So with respect to the project itself, infill housing options for neighborhoods, depending on council direction with respect to tonight's project charter, the intent is to look at forms of housing, including duplexes, triplexes, laneway housing, detached suites, heritage home conversions, small lot subdivision, and townhouses. So that's the scope that's contained within the charter and within the project at this point in time as we present this to council. I will note that the community plan didn't speak specifically to townhouses as part of infill housing, but the community plan, of course, does provide for town housing options in the community as part of multi-unit residential within our confines. So ultimately, the project it is intended for us to go out and review these various options with the community and to determine what the implications or impacts or the concerns that the community might have with respect to these. Ultimately, the project is intended to end up in the point where we have a preparation on draft policy criteria, regulation amendments, and draft design guidelines of these potential housing options. And that would be provided as part of this piece of work. And then subsequently, council would be considering that work and giving direction to staff as to what implementation items they'd like us to proceed with as part of the second phase of the overall initiative. And so I guess to repeat, the project charter is really a new tool for the district for us to have council's consideration of the governance component of any project that we have direction to complete and budget to implement. And the charter itself has a work plan, timeline, and provides for some high-level community consultation framework within the charter itself. So that I keep speaking to this project charter, I should mention or refer to that it is an attachment to this report, and it is that is the project charter that we are asking council to consider this evening. Perhaps in terms of just a bit of a recap, I know we've talked about the process and we've talked about the approach that we would take with respect to this project, but really what we're looking at in this process is to look at housing needs in Oak Bay and determine from the community's perspective what it is we think we can look at for alternative choices for housing within Oak Bay. We'd look at housing needs, we'd look at policy, and we'd look at neighborhood context considerations in terms of how we approach and go forward with this. So to get to that point of where we might have draft policy criteria, regulations, and guidelines prepared, we do want to go through an exercise that will take us through a series of information and consultation processes with our community. The estimated time frame for us to get completed with this work and this study is 12 months, as outlined in the charter. I've said it before, but I think I will just repeat now that there are numerous opportunities in this process for us to involve the community, to provide information, and to glean the community's input and perspective on the range of potential housing options that this study is determined to look at. We have basically our advisory planning commission is participating in this project for us, and they would be involved in providing a review function as well as recommendations at key stages of this process. And that's part of how our advisory planning commission integrates with staff and ultimately advises council as we go through these processes. The three phases of the project, we're in the project initiation phase now. We would and do intend to go out to the community and introduce this project and introduce the scope of what it is we're going to be looking at, just as a way of starting the process off with the community. Phase two is where we get into a little bit more in-depth review of options that we're looking at for potential housing types in neighborhoods, and we'd be doing that to look at design issues, function issues, and any implications that might be related to the different housing options that I mentioned at the outset of this presentation. With that, we would then move into drafting some of these policy, regulation, and guidelines, and going out to the community a second time, or it would be a third time, my apologies, and sort of gain the insights and the recommendations that the community would have for us in terms of what we move forward with housing options. I'll be done soon. So just to maybe emphasize that the project doesn't result in implementation associated with infill housing options for neighborhoods. What it does is it provides us with a framework that if council receives and endorses that, it would then provide an opportunity subsequent for council to look at what implementation directions that might be provided to staff in order to move forward with respect to these housing options that we examine. So I think with that, I'll also note that in terms of public engagement, we do involve the community at these different phases. We will be using a range of methods for us to engage with the community, and obviously we're going to acknowledge that we've got some limitations during COVID in terms of how we engage with the community, but our experience has been, and we've seen in other communities, that there's been really good opportunities for the community and sometimes a broader component or sector of the community to engage in studies like this or in projects like this. So with that, your worship, I guess I will note that there are options provided within the report. Option one is that we do proceed with the housing options that are listed in this, and we of course also endorse the project charter and allow staff to move ahead and start getting going on the project. Option two is that there's some amendment to what's presented to council here this evening, and we invite council to provide us with their comments and questions respecting that. And then, of course, option 3 is another direction the council may give regarding housing options for neighborhoods. So with that, Your Worship, I hope that's not been too long-winded, but I'd appreciate any comments or considerations the council might provide us this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. And I think there's definitely not too long-winded. I think this is a complicated, it's taken us a while to get to this point of giving some more concrete direction and setting expectations both for council and for the community. So I think this is very important that we get this right. With that, I'm happy to turn it over to council for questions. But I would just also invite, if there are members of the public that wish to speak, you can. Nobody pre-registered to speak on this item, but we do have some correspondence. You can call in. I'll get staff. Thank you for putting that up on the screen. A little bit further on this evening, probably I'm guessing 20 minutes to half an hour. We'll get through our questions and I'll reach out and invite any members of the public who wish to address us can do so as well. And then we'll come back here for some comments and direction from council. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
To get to the unmute button. Yes, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Anderson, for the report. I guess I have some questions first that I will start with, and that is about the rationale for using a charter for the project, and my familiarity with charters may be different than what is used in local governments. I haven't come across them too many times in that. So if I could kind of gain some understanding of the use of the charter, particularly since we now also have a corporate plan that is an umbrella document for the various departments. And as a charter, then what I'm looking for is clarification really around, is the intent of the charter to grant authority, and if it is to grant authority, who the authority is to and what the authority is for, and greater clarity on the actual reporting document that would be aligned with this charter. It's just, I don't know if that makes sense, but I take it staff can ask questions if they don't understand what I'm asking.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. It is a fairly new thing for us, and I appreciate the opportunity actually for staff to try and outline a little bit so we're all on the same page of the expectations of this. Mr. Anderson?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question, Councillor Patterson, through your worship. I'm going to do a little old school for a moment here, and that is that we typically do bring the terms of reference for a significant project to council, have done so in the past, have done in the course of my career for some time. A project charter really is the new wave. It's not that new, it's been around for a while, but it's, if you can think of it in that sense, the charter is really, for me, it's representing that the terms of reference, you know, what it is the project is going to do, what its goal is, and what its intent is. The charters themselves can be quite a range, just so everybody knows. They can be something quite simple and something quite detailed, depending on how operational or how in this category we're talking about. This is really a governance tool for us to have council say, yes, we know we provided that strategic direction. We know we budgeted for this, and now we're seeing basically how this project is going to be undertaken in the time frame of that project. And we're sitting here now, and we're sort of mutually agreeing that that's the understanding, and that's the direction that staff will take. So in terms of the authority, it really is a continuum of council's direction for staff on a project. We've got the significant direction to prepare this. It's budgeted for. Now we're coming forward and saying, here's how we're going to go about this. Is that your understanding as well? And then that gives us the green light to proceed. So I hope that's kind of explaining what this tool is and why it's here. We would be bringing something like this to you in the past regardless. We're now, like a lot of communities, using the project charter tool, and it's quite effective, especially I think when you're trying to define within an organization, if you will, the roles of the direct and do. And I'm over here on the do side. I think that's clear to everybody. So I hope that's helpful.
Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you. It does clarify somewhat, although I guess I'm still not understanding how then, if we're going to use project charters, how they also align with the corporate plan, because the corporate plan, my understanding, was the umbrella document under which for major projects or undertakings, that involve several departments, the corporate plan would be the guidance document telling us what that major undertaking was, who would lead it, and what departments would be involved. So, it seems like a duplication, but perhaps perhaps it's a useful tool for staff. And if that's the case, then that's fine. It's just for clarity for myself on council, which document do I go to? Do I go to the corporate plan, or do I go to this plan? Which one?
Councillor Patterson, I can maybe address some of that, because this is a governance directive document. The work plans are much more detailed, and they do lay out all those pieces. That's not for us to we can see it, but that's not ours to direct. This is, there was questions when this first came forward about were townhouses going to be included because they weren't in the OCP. What was the expectations of timelines? What is the expected deliverables of council, of staff? And this is what we're looking at. So it's to give that high level direction and to set the expectations, so that we're not 6 months into this going, well, I thought we'd have this in June, or I thought we'd have this in July or next year. And I think that's the intent. And Mr. Anderson, I'll let you, if you have anything else to add to that. I think that's my understanding of this.
Thank you, Worship. There's just one, if I may, the projects that you will see project charters for are those that are contained within the corporate plan. So this is coming from the corporate plan. And if I may, this is on the continuum of implementing those projects. So corporate plan overall, you look at community-wide, you set out the projects, the initiatives that you want to see as priorities. And then we as staff will be bringing you project charters associated with those significant projects that have been identified in the corporate plan. So this is really part of our sort of move forward and do tool in terms of implementing that corporate plan. I believe that captures it, but if I'm incorrect, I think I'd seek some guidance from our CAO if there's anything out of sorts.
Thank you for that. I do appreciate, Mayor, both yourself and Mr. Anderson clarifying a little more as to how it works together, and I think I can manage with whatever tools we're given. So if this is what staff wants to use, that's fine. The next question I have on this is, because it does outlined in this is, of course, to use a consultant, and I would like to have a little more clarity on what it is that we will be asking the consultant to do versus what staff might be doing on the project.
Yeah.
Mr. Anderson?
Yes, thank you. So principally, the consultants are going to be involved in putting together the information packages, the design packages associated with the different housing types as we move that forward. Secondarily, as a function, the consultants would assist and be involved in our public engagement, our community engagement around all of this exercise. Staff, with the use of that expertise and bringing in that design piece, will be basically steering and directing this project through to its completion. So staff have a significant role, with basically augmented by some expertise on preparing design around the different housing forms, but also on the methods of public engagement that often we find the consultant sector is, certainly during COVID, has been inventing some wonderful approaches to reaching out to the public on these types of projects. Thank you.
Thank you. If I could continue on that. When we talk about the consultants preparing the design, could we clarify what we mean by preparing the design? Does that mean the type of housing and the size of lot it would be on, or what do we mean by preparing the design?
Yeah, thank you through your worship for that, ask for clarification. So we've got a range of housing types, and we want to explore everything about them, if I may, within the context of neighborhoods. So we want to be able to have somebody look at the siting implications, the design implications I spoke to, but that's really on, okay, the different housing forms. Let's look at those. Let's look at the scale. Let's look at how those relate to adjacent, say, single family forms. So there'll be a site planning and an analysis of the implications of the different housing types. That'll be all part of that, particularly that phase 2 information package that we bring out. We really want to look at, if you will, the siting, the design, the functional and other implications of these housing types. And we want to explore that in a meaningful way with the community. So there's an understanding, but also some direction that we can seek from the community on what it is might be acceptable in a neighborhood. You know, is a duplex okay here? It's a detached suite okay there? You know, those kinds of things. So that's where we're going to be looking for that expertise to bring. Maybe it's broader than simply design, but it's that package of review that we want to bring forward on these housing types, that we're going to seek some assistance from the expertise.
Thank you. That's helpful. I guess my only comment on that would be, on prior occasions when we've looked at this, sometimes some of the options that were presented weren't actually done for lots in this community. Examples were used from other communities, which really made it difficult, I think, for our residents to have a vision of what it would look like here. So I think that, that would be an important component. But along with that, because it seems, or at least it seems to me, like this has been an ongoing discussion for quite some period of time, housing options, in fact, took place, with the OCP. And so I am wondering if this information that will be presented will have enough background information that there will be supplemental information for residents to really understand how these options might function relative to information they've already given us on some of their concerns. So in other words, will it address in advance some of those concerns? So we're not just rehashing, but we're actually starting on new ground and exploring where we are today and the issues that are probably more relevant, because I think some of these that were looked at for the OCP, it's been over a decade now. So times have changed a little bit. And so is that going to also be included?
Mr. Anderson?
Some clarification.
Yes, Your Worship, and yes, we do bring that context, and I think you make a very good point that you've got staff here that well understand the issues, and I'm hoping we also have a consultant team that well understands the Oak Bay issues as well. But we do bring that continuity, that context into any discussions we have with the community.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll let some of the other councillors, I noticed Councillor Green has her hand up, so if perhaps she would like to ask some questions, I'll pass it on to her.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Before I go on to Councillor Green, I just want a bit of clarification on that. In the section that says function, that Esther talked about the design, siting, design, and function. Is that function tied to the housing needs that we've identified, or is that a different kind of function?
Yeah, apologies. Sometimes I think we can lapse into using terms that we're accustomed to, but it's the broader implications, parking, for example, servicing. It's more along that. You're right, and embedded in that, there would be does it serve needs in the community? One of the things that we would look at is that how might these different housing forms address specific and different needs in the community? So we'll marry the need to the housing type, I guess, would be in terms of how we bring this forward. So we need to, I keep using the word need, but we do need to work from a basis of what needs are there, and are there alternatives or options for us to meet or provide for those needs. That's in a nutshell, I think, what what we're trying to do here. Is are there some needs that in terms of housing in Oak Bay in our neighborhoods that are not being met, and can those be met, and can they be met in a way that is compatible and works in our neighborhoods? And that's really, I think, what we're trying to look at here. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Mr. Anderson, for the report. And I just have a few questions. First of all, I'm just wondering how this project charter fits with, or not, with the secondary suites work that is being done. It seems to me that overall, secondary suites are another form of infill housing option. So that's one question. And then I guess my question on consultation is, I'm worried about the fact that we've had low uptake on online input from the community, our community engagement piece, certainly for meetings and so on. We haven't been overwhelmed with participants. And I'm just concerned that if we're going out to the community again in a consultation model, that we include other forms or other tools apart from online consultation. There are a number of residents that don't have access to computers or don't use them or whatever. So I'm really concerned that the consultation model will be all encompassing and inclusive, because I worry about that aspect. And subsequently to that, I was just wondering, we're doing the consultation now on secondary suites. Was there any thought given to bundling consultation on this piece along with the secondary suites piece, in terms of, I guess I'm concerned that we're going out to the community quite often, and that would be a question. And then finally, on page 2 of the appendix, the paragraph that, sorry, I'm just trying to find it here. The paragraph that is under the timeline project stages 1, 2, and 3. The first paragraph there says that none of this will result in implementation. So I guess my question is around timelines for implementation. I'm assuming that all of this work will occur over the next 12 months, but what are the plans after that? Because I'm thinking that, I guess I'm disappointed for this council that we may not have anything implemented clearly before the end of this term, and we have roughly 18 months left of meaningful work. So I guess I'm concerned about the timeline around implementation. So I'm hoping those questions are answerable, and I appreciate your input. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Mr. Anderson, I think you're on the hot seat for all three of those suites, consultation process, and particularly in person, and implementation timelines.
Thank you, Worship. Thank you, Councillor Green, for the questions. So as I think we're all aware, we've been underway with the secondary suites study. We're at a point where we're actually taking our draft strategy associated with secondary suites to the public. We've got an online survey that's about to hit the ether fairly shortly. So I think the opportunity, if I may, and respectfully, would be quite difficult for us to get any kind of bundling or going together with our infill housing options work. We're going to be a few months away before we're into that sort of similar stage where we've got enough information that we're asking the kind of questions that we're actually presenting shortly with respect to secondary suites. You're absolutely correct that secondary suites within homes is part of an opportunity to increase the amount of people that are living or have living opportunities within neighborhoods. So secondary suites, yes, are part of that broad range. That project is well underway, and I guess we're hoping that we can get that to a point where we've got a strategy there for council to have a look at with respect to secondary suites shortly. So I think pardon me, I need to, maybe in respect to the consultation, I'll step to that for just a moment. Absolutely, we need to do more than online when we're looking at, especially something that has the complexity, I think, of a range of housing types. And we like the community to speak to us about what it is they think about the implications or the opportunities. And I absolutely hear you in terms of, yes, we've all sort of jumped to digital because it's kind of been forced upon many of us, but in many respects, I think we're always mindful that we need to provide those opportunities, and we can provide them. It's just we have to kind of be a bit old school in some ways about how we approach this, and we have to be new school at the same time. I think we're prepared to do that, and we've been doing so, I think, recently with respect to the suites as well. In terms of timelines, so maybe I'll just speak to the suites. We could potentially have some direction from council to get working on some aspect of implementing the suites. Alternatively, council could hold off on that direction and have it provided at the time that they're also considering the results of the infill housing options study. But to go to the infill housing options study, our intent is to have the work done so that we would at least have a frame for council to consider with respect to infill housing. Like I said, in the first quarter of 2022, direction can be given for staff to start working on the implementation tools associated with that. That would take, the course, and I would say the matter of probably at least a year to have all of that approved, if you will, and in the can. So pardon that phrase, but so we're looking at if we can get direction early next year on infill housing, we'll start working on that. If we get direction on secondary suites in the near term, say in June from council, we can start working on the implementation pieces associated with secondary suites. I hope that's reasonably clear. Thank you.
Councillor Green.
Just a quick follow-up on the secondary suites implementation. That would be this year then? Thank you.
It could be with council's direction, and if I may, the qualifier on it will be it depends on what it is we get direction to implement with respect to secondary suites. We do have a couple of components to that work, both considering new suites and also looking at existing suites, and there are different implications for those in terms of how we implement. So I would leave it for when we get there in terms of but I'm telling you that we can do some implementation on secondary suites this year with council's direction.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I have Councillor Braithwaite, then Nay.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll ask a couple of questions perhaps, and then leave it to my fellow councillors to ask their questions before I go on with my list.
Oh, dear.
Well, sorry, it's not that big of a list. Don't get worried. A couple of things though, and I guess I'll start with the staff report, if I might. On page 1, it's at the very bottom of page 1, the second last paragraph, I think it says that the forms of housing that we're going to be reviewing will include duplexes, triplexes, laneway houses, detached suites, heritage homes, conversions, and small lot subdivisions. And I'm wondering if because I think in the OCP, we actually talk about it including large lot subdivisions. So I'm wondering if we can have a conversation around when small lot subdivisions were included, because I was racking my brain to try and figure that out and I couldn't remember. So perhaps I'm sure staff will know when we included small lot subdivisions rather than large lot subdivisions.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Mr. Anderson.
Oh, wonderful. They're one at a time. I said, oh, because I thought maybe they would be all at once. I am taking notes. So that's a very good question. And please don't rack your brain anymore, because what that is it is basically a rephrasing of the infill language in the community plan does speak to, as part of infill, that the subdivision of larger lots is considered a component of infill. So what this term might trigger, oh, you don't mean subdividing standard lots, you mean subdividing to much smaller lots. And I think it's that matter of degrees. It's the principle of it is, should we make better use of our land in Oak Bay? And if there are lots that have opportunities to be subdivided, that should be encouraged. I believe that's what the community plan is saying now. What this is saying, and it is worthy, if I may suggest, of discussion here, is what this is saying is that there may be opportunities in terms of infill to look at the degree with which we go to small lots. So do we just start and stay with subdivide large lots, that's good enough for infill? Or do we look at the potential for allowing for smaller lots? And I'm using smaller on purpose, not small lots. And maybe that might have been a better phrase or term to use in there, but it's really, the intent is similar, but I think it's a good question and a good point, if I may, that if we mean to look at small lots, I think we're going to be looking at those small lot, 400 square meter opportunities with this. And it may be that our initial test of the idea of smaller lots is just a resounding, no, I don't think that's a great idea, Mr. Anderson. I think you should try something else. Maybe you should allow for conventional lots to be subdivided through rezoning like you might be doing now. And so I know that's a bit of a long one on that, but it could be reworded back to the allow for subdivision of larger lots if that's council's wish. It wasn't really intended to change it up too much, but maybe move it a little bit closer to meeting some objectives of more affordable housing opportunities, and smaller lots do represent that typically. So,
if I might, Mayor, I guess that where my confusion lies, Mr. Anderson, is that, I live on my lot is 50 by 115. Is that considered a small lot? Or is that not considered a small lot? Is something double that size considered a small lot?
Mr. Your Worship, not a small lot, but I'd also argue that that's not quite a conventional sized lot either. So it's right, it's right on the edge. But you can see small lots. They can be anywhere. Like the frontage is always, for me, the sort of the best way to understand this. And when I start saying square meters, I think I get lost myself. But so a 30-foot frontage or a 25-foot frontage, that's a small lot. There's no question. You'll see that, and that's often defined in a community. So a 45 is a small lot in some communities with frontage, and a 50-foot is usually getting you a little closer to 50, 60. You're starting. That's kind of a standard lot frontage. So I guess my short answer is that if we're going to look at small lots, we might be looking at smaller than 50 as part of the study.
Thank you. And if I may continue, Mayor?
Go ahead, Councilor Braithwaite.
And then I guess that I'm also wondering about if we are looking to have APC input into the project charter, what kind of a timeline might we be looking at for that? If council elected to have this sent to APC for their input before we moved forward, if we were going to move forward with it.
Mr. Anderson?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. So typically, we would get the okay to proceed with the project, and we would have those terms or the project charter scope defined, and then we'd start to work with our advisory planning commission to work our way through that process. I mean, we technically don't have a project to go talk to the APC about until we've got a charter okayed. In terms of implications for timelines, I kind of suggest that we might be looking at a month or a month and a half added to the process if we wanted to sort of go review and come back and then finalize. So I'm not sure if that meets our objectives in terms of timing of this. I feel like I'm a little behind the 8 ball already in terms of delivering for you on this one, but yeah, I hope that provides a bit of an answer to that.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll just ask 2 more questions and I'll pass it along because I see there's 2 other people in line to ask questions. So as far as the community input goes, and I'm looking now at the actual community charter on page 7 or page 8, I guess it is. It does talk in each phase about community input. And so I'm wondering, like in phase 1, what kind of community input do you see, or is it really more just that we're presenting this whole project to the community?
Mr. Anderson?
Yeah, through your worship. Yes, it's introducing the project and introducing the range of housing options that we're going to be looking at. And there may be some initial feedback and response as part of that, but it really is informing the community and allowing the community to start thinking a little bit about this topic, and it's the next phase where we start asking the community, what do you think about these options? And please give us some feedback on those.
Thank you. And part B of that question would be, in phase 3, would we then also allow community inputs? Like I guess would the information the final report come back to a council meeting or a committee of the whole meeting? And would we be able to then yet again have more community input?
Mr. Anderson?
So, sorry, I should wait my direction.
No, it's all good. Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. So phase 3, we're actually going to be presenting some of the pieces, the policy and the regulation and some of the draft guideline pieces to allow the community to actually consider whether or not those are going to be recommended to council. So we're actually seeking some community recommendation at that stage of the process. So when you see the results of this, you will see the results of that public comment on these, and that'll be in the sort of final information for you to receive. And of course, it's only final from a staff perspective. In other words, here we're delivering this. At that point, council can give us the direction that they wish in terms of, do we need to go look at something else, or any direction, frankly, council's has that ability to do. But phase 3, we're actually asking the community to provide us with those who want to participate, their recommendations on these options and the components that we presented to them. And that should hopefully provide some clear indication for council in terms of what it is we might move forward with and actually start to look at implementation for. Thank you.
Thank you. And my last question, Mayor, would be kind of along the same idea of the public consultation or the community input. Would council have the right to extend that process if we wanted to have in-person consultation after the pandemic period is over? Because I mean, I guess to me, it seems like I would really like us to be able to have some sort of in-person consultation with our community. So would we be able to extend the timeline to be able to have that in-person input?
Mr. Anderson?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a difficult one, and I'll tell you why. And that is, we will be doing consultation. We may figure out ways to have a fairly robust consultation process with small groups. Like, we're definitely going to be exploring all of this to see if we can get as rich a response as we can in terms of this process. But we would go through that, and we go through all of that consultation on these different phases. And then if we get to a point and we say, but now we'd like to extend this process and do some in-person on that, I guess what I'm saying is it would seem like it maybe it just puts everything in a hold pattern, because we'd be kind of going back in person, I guess, with the same information that we'd already gone through phase 2 and phase 3 with the community. So that's why, yes, you can do it. The implications are that I think you repeat and duplicate and do basically put the process on hold at that point. So I guess I'm hearing loud and clear that we need to do our best to try and get something that it might not repeat the public information sessions, the community attending in large groups. It may not be any of that, but can we get something that is as meaningful for individuals to participate in this process? I guess that's a really good sort of goal for us to try and achieve. Sorry, I think that wasn't really the answer to the first question, but
I'll pass it along now, Mayor. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to ask you just for clarification on that answer, because I think this is really important. The community, the charter sort of lays out those steps. But to Councillor Braithwaite's point, if we're in a very dynamic situation with the pandemic, things might change. So are we clear about when this comes back to council for touch points to say, okay, now we can't do this kind of consultation, but we could do this, or those? Where in this are there touch points with council to give that direction?
Thank you very much for that question, Your Worship. It makes me realize, oh, I didn't speak to that. So in the process, we do come to council at key stages, at key milestones in this process through step 1, 2, and 3 with this. And so at each of those opportunities, those junctures, the information that we've got will be shared with you, and where we're headed or where we've been. Those are key pieces, and you can expect to see us at least 3 times in this process around that, because again, we time it to those stages. But I think there's opportunities for us to. We're headed out for consultation in phase 2. Council, and Planning Commission. Here's what it is we're hoping to use as our communication tools. And what do you think of that? Does that meet our objectives for engagement with the community?
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Sorry to jump in there. Councillor Nathan, Councillor Hamilton.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Anderson, for the report here, and thanks to my colleagues for all the good questions, which kind of across taking off most of the questions I had. So they've really been taken care of. But maybe I'll just sort of ask you, Mr. Anderson, if you could just drill a little bit deeper into some of the questions that have been asked around the nature of the engagement, and help us to understand, because I think what you're proposing is a fairly robust engagement process here as the project unfolds. And I wonder if you could perhaps speak to understanding some of the details and the nature of the complexity that's probably in your mind, but not necessarily so for some of us who aren't planners or have gone through this process, that would justify that extent of community engagement. And I'm thinking particularly of what goes on during stage 2, that engagement. Like, could you help us understand, are you going to the public with some clear options available at that point around how to unfold this infill process? Or are you going to the community with details about, I mean, I do see you've got siting design function here. Is that the scale of the information you'll be asking the community to figure out what kind of housing would go where? If you could just speak to how that works.
Thank you, Councillor.
Thank you, through your worship. It's the latter, not the former. But I'll begin with no. We're in that phase. We're not going. We're taking housing types that are to move back up. Those are the housing options we're looking at for infill and neighborhoods. But we're taking those housing forms, those housing types, full descriptions and information around that, and presenting that to the community and speaking with the community about what the implications of that are and what the community's thoughts are around each of those housing types that we're bringing forward. It's really an information exchange, and then an opportunity for the community to identify issues or support or anything at that stage in terms of stage 2. So we're not asking them for options to do infill housing or options to do duplexes instead of this. We're actually bringing the housing types forward, each of them. As you may recall, in our strategic discussion, I indicated that we could try and compress this process a little bit if we, in fact, put all of our housing types and we put them together with their descriptions, and then we can forward to the community to present that and ask for the community's thoughts on that. So that's really what we're doing there. We're presenting information on the housing types, seeking community input on what it is the implications are from their perspective, from the community's perspective on that. It's that next move in phase 3, where we've got some drafts around the housing types and the policy, regulation, guideline implications of that. That's really where I think we'll be asking the community, I mean, in the light of what you've seen, would you recommend that we proceed further with duplexes? Would you recommend we proceed? So it's there where I think it'll start to look a little bit more please advise us as to what your thoughts are on these various housing types. What would you recommend that council consider, in terms of directing implementation on? So I hope that's, it's robust, I agree, but it's also, I think it's quite focused, if I may. It's, I've had planning processes that they've run the range of topics. This is a housing and a fairly directed housing study that we're doing. And so it allows us to get quite focused in. We have a range of housing types here. I'm not going to play that down, but we are going to try and bring those forward to the community and have them look at each of those in the context of our neighborhoods.
Just one other follow-up, Mr. Mayor, if I may, but so Mr. Anderson, you were mentioning that it could be more compressed, the process. And I'm wondering if you could just speak to that more and speak to, obviously you haven't compressed it, you've, focused it and engaged the community around at the stage 2. And I'm just wondering if you could speak to sort of the pros and cons of compressing that part of the work, if I've understood you correctly.
Mr. Anderson?
Yeah, through your worship, I think what I was referring to is that when we had our strategic discussion and this project was longer in time frame, the opportunity to modify that, I proposed that rather than going out, I had originally envisioned that we would go out with each housing type and individually we'd speak to the community on each of those housing types. That was quite a robust process. And with respect to the time frame, my response was, we can do this in a shorter time frame. We will just take all of the housing types out to the community each time. So that was the compression that did occur, that is in the charter and the project that you've got before you this evening.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ney. We have up next Councillor Appleton and then Zelka.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to staff. Less questions and more just some observations about the content of the project charter. That I did want to underline the importance of a diversity and I guess an innovative approach to public engagement. I think that that's been well stated here, so I will just add my voice to the importance of really finding a solid way to get out to the public and do the absolute best we can in an evolving COVID situation. I guess what I was wondering if the project charter might just be edited slightly to just really underline and reinforce its role in advancing, first of all, responding to the district's housing needs assessment. And it is referenced in both the report and the project charter, but I think it's important. The district, this council and district has been proactive in getting on completing that housing needs assessment in an expedited way and early in the process. So I'd really like to see the charter reflect that it represents a very direct sort of next step in implementing or responding to what the housing needs assessment is telling us. And I think that, like I say, that is referred to in here, but I would love to see it be very explicit in terms of that. And also that it be explicit in terms of its role in responding to the OCP. As staff's mentioned in the report, and as we've discussed through the strategic planning process related to this item, it's clear that the OCP does support the evaluation of different types of housing options. This is a direct response to goals of the OCP. So I'd like to see that just specifically referenced and kind of underlined in the project charter, just so anybody who picks it up and reads it understands the role of the chart, the role of the project in achieving specific goals with respect to the OCP and the housing needs assessment. So. Thank you, Your Worship. Less of a question, more just of an observation on content.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Mr. Anderson, the housing charter as a 2-page document is a little light on that front end, and there is certainly multiple aspects of the OCP that inform it, and the housing needs report, as Councillor Appleton said, also a big piece. Is that something we can include in this, or should include, or what's your suggestion here? within this document for those pieces.
Thank you, Worship. My response is I'd be happy to strengthen that. I mean, that is where this unfolds from. There's no question about it. And yes, if it's not jumping out as much as council wishes, it is what this is responding to. So I have no problem whatsoever with putting in some more specific language around responding to the housing needs report and the OCP policy direction that we kind of listed off sections in the report itself, but we can probably strengthen, well, we can strengthen that in the document. I don't think it'll be 2 pages though. I think it might end up being 2 1/4. That's okay. I think the other point I should make, if I may, Your Worship, is that we will continue to bring forward that context as we engage with the community on this process. We always lead with where are we coming from and what is the direction, and so we will ensure that is also continuing to be communicated. But point taken that if it needs to be strengthened or more explicit in the charter, we're happy to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. I would concur that the why is always is often a helpful piece for our documentation, even for internal, just so people understand the driver for this. And also I think the context that this is to look at the options, but these are not necessarily all, these are not going to be all selected. It's just we're looking at them all so we can decide which ones are the most appropriate. I think those kind of messages are quite important. Obviously more in the public communications, but this is a public document. Councillor Zelka, go ahead.
Oh, thank you very much, Chair, and through you to staff. First of all, I want to compliment you on the whole documentation process going forward with respect to that thing that we won 3rd place on at the was it UBCM? That included the corporate charter and trying to come up with the ways where our OCP drives these various reports, drives our annual plan, which turns and drives our corporate plan. And I get the impression you're now working your way down to the lower levels with for example, terms of reference and what I see here, a project charter that I assume is coming from the project plan, the corporate plan, and of course tying in with our financial plans and those other aspects. Let me just pause there and ask if that is the general intent with this type of documentation approach.
Sure, and I'll let Ms. Varela or Mr. Anderson answer that one because it's sort of a broader question than than just this one document. Ms. Varela, or and for those watching, it's Ms. Varela is our Chief Administrative Officer.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think this is one additional piece in how we continue with that ongoing improvement of how we convey the work that the district is undertaking. So again, we don't want to get to a place of expectations not being aligned at the start of a project. So I know during my couple years here, I've heard some discussion about, oh, well, does that include actual right down to amending the bylaws, or, you know, oh, I thought that was happening in fall, but it's really happening in spring and things like that. So the intention of this document isn't to be all encompassing, but to get those broad level pieces. And again, it, you know, there's a timeline there, there's communications. Those are all, once we get the high level nod, the planning department takes those pieces away and starts to fill in that detail. But I do think it's a piece, not necessarily linked to that suite of documents that we competed for the UBCM award. But it does make that continued commitment to how well can we communicate to the public what we're doing and to make sure council's expectations are met right at the start of a project.
Thank you, Ms. Varela. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much, and thank you for that input. So I get the impression that, you know, there's always an attempt to make things better, and I think I heard you say that, you know, just in terms of communicating intent, not only capturing in a clear way what council's intent and expectations are, but also making sure the public knows in some ways what's going on through these documents. Did I get that correctly, or did I miss something?
Ms. Varela.
I would say that's always the goal, Councillor Zelka.
Okay, great. So let me just speak about the oh my God. what's the word for it? To kind of, because at some point, beginning with the end in mind, eventually we're going to get to an infill residential development permit area at the end of this whole process, which will allow us to specify form and character. So let me just speak about form and character first of all of the documentation a little bit. So as a project charter, I've been trained for years as a project manager. I apologize, but I don't recognize this as a project charter. I've heard some of my council colleagues, describe it as a teeny bit light here, a teeny bit light there. I'd have to generally agree with them. I would love to see drill down a little bit more, and I would also love to see maybe some aspects, for example, where it's slightly in conflict with the staff report, sort of clarified, because just so it's really clear, what is it we're actually providing authorization of this project charter, and what is it that we're asking you to do? When I talk about an inconsistency, for example, in the actual staff report on page 2 near the top, it talks about how ultimately this project will result in what sounds like, to some aspects of actually draft regulations and draft design guidelines, and actually coming up with some aspects of the meat and potatoes of what we're going to go and actually do is what that paragraph is telling me. Whereas in the actual, what's being referred to as a project charter, it basically says, well, not really. We're going to be coming back more and achieving just policy objectives, and it will be maybe a later phase or a later project that will get into actual implementation. So those sort of aspects, I would love to see that tightened up so that it is clear what it is I'm being asked on this body to approve staff to go away and do. Should I pause there and see if staff wanted to comment on that?
Sure. I might just add that the community charter is that document is the one that we're asked to approve. So that should be if that isn't clear, that's where we should make the clarifications.
I apologize. The project charter or the legislation known as the community charter?
The project charter here that we're dealing with.
Okay.
And I think maybe you could explain your is the project charter itself in terms of its deliverables not clear, or you just the broader comments in the staff report accompanying you feel are not clear enough?
No, as a general housing framework, I get the impression where we're going, and I support us moving towards a housing framework. And I see that this document is attempting to capture one piece, and most likely is going to lead, for example, when we talk about the touch points, I would love to see those touch points built into this project charter. Most project charters that I've seen have not only a sort of a timeline laid out with words, but also has maybe a little more drill down, in fact, a lot more drill down on the actual dates. If there are going to be 3 touch points coming back to council with updates and ask us to change, I see general dates in there, but I would love to see more detailed dates, for example, in an actual project charter. I assume there'll also be dates related to the RFP, because this thing makes general reference to hiring a consultant. I presume there's going to be an RFP in here, but it doesn't really talk about that. It just says in general terms a consultant. Plus, most likely, I think we're all going to want to see the survey questions similar to what's being done for the secondary suite. I don't really see that listed in here in terms of another touch point. So those would be some examples of detail I would love to see laid out in this so that the expectation is clear.
Okay, Mr. Anderson, that level of detail, if not in here, then where and when?
I'd like to defer to Ms. Varela with respect to that. I will just speak to the idea that there's some difference between the draft policy criteria, regulation, and guideline in the report and the draft policy, regulation, and guideline that's in the charter. They're the same. So I've just read them both. But I'll defer to Ms. Varela with respect to the broader charter question, if I may, Your Worship.
Ms. Varela?
Thank you, Your Worship. So on page 2 of the report, it talks about ultimately the project will result in the preparation of draft policy criteria, draft regulation amendments, and draft design guidelines for potential housing options, and will include recommendations for implementation of select housing options through the policy and bylaw amendments. It's those policy and bylaw amendments that council will subsequently adopt that are considered considered a separate but resulting deliverable of this project. So the timeline you're seeing before you doesn't actually include council making those bylaw adoptions. The recommendations for those will be made, and then that's a separate process. So that is reflective in both the charter and the staff report. I just wanted to clarify that. And was there an additional question through you, Your Worship?
In terms of the touch points.
Yeah, just ability to provide either in this charter, if we wish, or as an ancillary follow-up to come back with some more detail in terms of some of the specific timelines for some of the pieces.
Absolutely, Your Worship. Thank you. So again, this is a high-level framework. Now, staff, if we get the nod from council to proceed along these lines, staff starts to flesh out the more detailed pieces. We'll work to retain the contractor. We'll implement the RFP process. All those things always happen with the project anyway. This is an additional tool for council right out of the gate. So this is an actual extra piece that you've never gotten before, despite us going ahead and doing those projects, getting an RFP, bringing items back to council for their consideration. We're saying this project is in phases. There will be a communication plan that council signs off on. Certainly, if there's key deliverables such as surveys, things like that, council will likely weigh in. So if you go to the project charter, it says public engagement will be conducted through each of the phases. The communication plan itself will be developed in conjunction with the consultant selected for the project. So again, council staff are acknowledging to council that there's more work to be done, but we're indicating to you that there is a deliverable coming for a communication plan once we get in to do the work.
Thanks, Ms. Varela. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you. That's very helpful. You described this as a high-level framework. I couldn't agree with you more, which is why, from my perspective, this appears to be more of a terms of reference as opposed to a project charter. If we rename this a project, a terms of reference that would then lead to a project charter, I would feel a lot more comfortable, and that might be something I'll be proposing later on, so that hopefully you could then come back with that detail, and then we could sign off on the actual detail. If I may continue.
Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you so much. In the first page of this document described as a project charter, it talks about $120,000, and it also talks about a consultant. Within the, I guess, approval mechanisms of this project, will you, I don't recall how much, how do I say this? Our CAO, we've delegated a certain level of procurement sign off. And does 120,000 fall under that, or will this have to come back to council for approval? I don't. If someone could remind me what that level is, please.
Well, I'll just ask staff what the plan is for this one in terms of the selection process. Would the approval of the consultant come back to council?
Thank you, Worship. No, the limit is well below that of council approval with respect to the contractor on this project. Thank you.
Councillor Zelka.
Is it possible we could ask that touch point be included?
Mr. Anderson.
Your Worship, I think if you don't, I'm going to ask you to indulge me for a moment, if you don't mind, and that is that I think Ms. Varela has noted it a few times, but we're here with council at a level of governance and not at a level of operations. And in fact, the project charter does reflect a governance project charter, not an operations project charter. I've been involved in the level of detailed project charters that Councillor Zelka refers to, and they are at the operational level. Staff seek direction from council and budget to proceed with the project. We bring the project charter that has the components and the intent of the project, and ask you to concur with that as you've directed us under the strategic priorities. But we're not asking council to become involved in the matters that you frankly pay us professionally to deliver for you. And I hope that's reasonably clear for everybody. Thank you.
So by default, this will follow its normal process. There could be an ask made of council to change that process in this case, if that's the desire of council. But as of this point, it's not. That's what I heard you. I heard the answer. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
I appreciate staff always being honest with us, and as we attempt to be honest with you, of course, in a very respectful way. So thank you for that input. I very much appreciate many of the questions already put forward by my colleagues. I'll just sort of zoom through them. Many of the questions have already, in many ways, been answered. One of the concerns I had at the governance level is this whole concept of change management with the community. And let me sort of harken back to 2016, previous mandate, when we had a previous council that was pushing the staff at the time to hurry, get it done, hurry, get it done. And they brought in a consultant, and they hurried, and they presented it to the public at the time, and it was my opinion was that it was a complete fiasco. Some aspects of that, of course, related to that the consultant that was brought in was presenting many housing types and housing examples that really didn't apply in Oak Bay, which kind of freaked a few people out, in my humble opinion. This is my characterization, may be wrong. But as a result of that, let's call it felt to me like a bit of an uproar in the community because of there's folks on what's that street across from Oak Bay High, Epworth, for example, was going to be suddenly changed all the fourplexes. So I saw some neighbors of mine on Epworth they were rather upset, and that was expressed quite loudly to the staff and council at the time, and that unfortunately resulted in the whole project coming to an end. And for me, I would have loved to have seen some aspects of that survive, but unfortunately the whole project stopped. So I was hoping, and here's my worry, I was hoping that we would learn from that. And I got the impression we were going to proceed with this with one housing type at a time, with respect to the amount of change that the community could handle for those who are still on the fence, even though there are some who would like to see it move faster. Because God forbid, I would not want to see this fail. Many of us who work in the project management world, whether it's at governance or operations, know of the ADCAR model. And for those who don't know ADCAR, awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and especially reinforcement. I heard staff answer a previous question saying, we don't want to repeat ourselves. We don't want to, bore people with all this engagement. And yet, because we're coming in with a rather large change to our land use mechanisms and our land use options, this is a very large change that there are still some people out there who know nothing about this and will be incredibly surprised, even though some of us feel, we've been talking about this here at this table at least, that it should be old hat. Well, let me just use the marina RFP briefly for a moment. I'm getting to my question in a second, Chair.
Please. Yeah,
I am getting to my question. We've already got feedback on the marina RFP, which I thought was an excellent, in terms of the pandemic, an excellent public engagement. And we're getting feedback from some really reputable people and organizations and in the community to say that was not adequate, where they need more engagement and consultation. And I'm worried the same thing will happen with this project if we squeeze too many housing types in and we push it too hard. And for example, I would not want to support and would not want to see secondary suites folded into this project. That would be the worst thing, I believe, for the potential success of this project to see happen. And I strongly, from a governance perspective, encourage my council colleagues, do not do that, please, even though staff might think, well, it's more efficient. Some around the table might think it's more efficient.
Just for a second here,
Yes.
Council has already given direction at this point.
Yes.
To move this forward. That's council's direction to include this together in this timeline, in this format. So you made an implication that staff should not be doing that. But
no, I worry.
Council's already made that decision. No, it's fair to raise the worry, and I think we have to consider that in the charter that's in front of us. But just, I don't want to go down the path of making it sound like it, and it just sounded like the way you worded that it was staff's direction.
No,
This is council's direction, and we're
I-
following
I'm
that
only
unless it
speaking as
changes.
council. Let me speak directly to council with the suggestion that came forward to fold in secondary suites. I would not support that. I just simply would say that, especially in terms of the change management aspect and the potential success of the project. So thank you, Chair. I take your words to heart. And I'm hoping we can go back more to old school public consultation, since I agree with some on council. There are people out there who don't have computers and aren't new school. So I definitely would like to see some aspects of this. In terms of the public consultation, I'm really pleased to see that it's mentioned at least a number of times in here. I worry that it's only a survey. I would definitely like to see more hands-on when we can get there, hopefully later on this year as more the vaccine rolls out. This vaccine is, the whole pandemic aspect is a real worry for me in terms of the success of this project. So I wanted to ask staff if the phase 2 aspect of the project charter that is scheduled for the summer, maybe some of us will be able to travel with vaccinations and we'll be away. Summertime is not usually a good time. In fact, council takes the summer off. Summertime is not usually a good time to do public consultations. What do you anticipate happening if there's very little uptake, or if there's only uptake from those few people who happen to be around?
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Mr. Anderson, the current phase 2 runs from June through September. Is that is a public consultation in there? Is that possible? Do you think would that possibly have to be stretched out a little bit to allow further than the end of September?
Your worship, through your worship, yes, it can be. I guess in part, we need to be mindful that we've given direction to complete a project within a corporate plan strategic timeframe, and in order for us to unfold that project, you have a draft timeline in front of you that represents the abilities to deliver on that timeframe. So I am aware that in the past there may have been some lesser involvement in engagement in summer periods. I'm finding with the way the world is changing, and not specifically around pandemic, that in fact, engagement is occurring year-round in our field, in this profession, and in any sort of local government field. But I anticipate that we'll be able to move the engagement to within that sort of fall September timeframe, and we'll do the prep work over the course of the summer to get there. Thank you, Worship.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. I think that's going to be part of the job of council, is to kind of keep an eye on that and see how it's going. And I will just also make a comment that we seem to always get complaints that either we're not doing enough consultation, or we're dragging our feet by doing too much consultation. I don't know of a single project that doesn't seem to have both complaints come out of it. So go ahead, Councillor Zelka, you still have the table.
Yes, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Consultation. I'm pleased to see that in the consultation in the model, as laid out in the staff report, the IAP2 framework, it does say consult. I wish we'd have a bit more involvement. So in terms of my wish, the APC input, I'm pleased another councillor mentioned the APC input. That is a concern for me as well. I wish that the APC could actually comment on this project charter, since and have input ideally. In particular, we can't do in-person public consultation very well. I wouldn't suggest that they stand in any way for that, but I definitely would like to see some aspect of consultation with input ability from the APC to assist and to help with in terms of suggestions of changes to this document that could make sure that it would be more successful, potentially more successful. Is that a possibility that could be added to this document in terms of the engagement on the timeline and the review?
I'm sorry, are you talking about the APC specifically?
Yeah, well, for example, a referral to the Advisory Planning Commission and asking them to review on this this document called the Project Charter, and ask them for their input on ways to ensure that it could be more a higher level of success, knowing that we have a track record in Oak Bay where, well, knowing the track record we have in Oak Bay.
Okay. So there's two halves of that in terms of the engagement. One would be on the charter itself, and the other one is the use of the APC going forward through this process.
Both, yes.
Yeah. So, Ms. Varela, I see you have your hand up on this. Is there anything you wish to add on that process?
Certainly, Your Worship. So staff would take direction if council chose to direct this project charter to the advisory body. I think you have to be clear on what you're asking the advisory body for. So for example, council has endorsed a timeline. They've endorsed a budget. We've mentioned there will be a communication plan that would be coming back. Things like that. So respectfully, I'd just be looking for clear council direction on what you actually want the advisory body to provide you information for with this particular piece. Certainly going forward, I think we can have planning staff detail out what will be the touch points that go to the APC for making recommendation to council on key milestones. But again, staff serve at the pleasure of council, so we'll take direction accordingly.
Can I get just a little clarification on that, Ms. Varela, and maybe to Mr. Anderson? Is there within that this framework going forward? Because I've heard, there's a little bit of leap of faith in this document because it is high level. That there be a regular touch point. Is this something we could look at for the duration of this project, having it as just a standing agenda item once a month on council and on the APCs, so that at some point that'll involve some advice and feedback to reports, and sometimes it'll just be an update in terms of timelines and where things are at and what's happening. Is that something that we could include as sort of just both for council and for the APC to be sort of written into this document, that monthly touch point? Maybe that goes to Mr. Anderson.
Oh, my mute is off. Thank you, Your Worship. Well, as I'd indicated, we will be having regular touch points in with council as we proceed through key phases of the project, and also with the planning commission on that. I guess it's up to council, if I may, regarding whether we have it as a monthly report out. I'd leave that to your direction.
Thanks, Mr. Anderson. Councillor Zelke, you still have the floor.
Thank you very much. I've only got, I believe, 2 more questions, but let me just say as a comment, I very much like your suggestion as a way of ensuring, not that we're looking over anyone's shoulders, but because this is such an important project, and because especially with the pandemic, it would also help simply advertise what the heck we're doing to staff, and might give the APC, since we have unfortunately been underusing them in other areas, maybe give them a leg up with something to work on, and provide some wonderful input. So I very much like that suggestion, and look forward to us to council talking about it later on. As a project manager, I always begin with the end in mind. So from a governance perspective, let me go back to the OCP, in particular H12 it's referenced in the staff report on page 2, where we consider forms of different infill housing. Oh, can you hear me? Yeah,
Go ahead, Councillor Zelke.
Yeah, forms of, so H12 in particular talks about infill housing. On H12, yes, there it is. And H12 makes specific reference to subdivision of larger lots. I was wondering, since that is the wording used in the OCP, if it's a hypothetical, if we approve a different wording in this project charter, doesn't that override the OCP? I'd rather not override the OCP, and I'd rather go back to the original wording. Is that something we could possibly do?
Mr. Anderson, with the intent of this this project charter, just using the language that's in the OCP of subdivision of larger lots, I guess theoretically into smaller lots. Does that still give the framework that you're anticipating?
Yeah, in my opinion, Your Worship, it doesn't conflict with the community plan. I mean, what I've explained it earlier in the evening, where the intent of having a look at the idea of smaller lot subdivision is to sort of look at that policy that says allow for subdivision of larger lots, to look at that policy a little bit more closely if there's an opportunity to better define maybe how small a lot we might consider in Oak Bay. As I said at the outset, that is council's direction. If council does not wish to pursue the small lot subdivision, looking at further degrees of the size of a lot, then we could return it to the subdivision of existing larger lots in terms of language, Your Worship.
Okay. Thank you. I'll leave that to the interest of council as to whether or not they want to just use that word. I think the intention is understood, but if that's, I understand from Councillor Zelka's point, your point that moving away from the language used in the OCP just opens up, questions to people as to what's being meant.
Well, if I
Anything
may,
else you wish to add? Go ahead.
yes, if I may, not only opens up questions, but for example, in the news today, there are other local authorities that are implementing tiny lots and tiny houses as a way of moving forward some of their local initiatives and priorities. And my worry about the wording, potential wording change from the OCP might give. I'm not sure that's the intention here. If it is, I wish someone would tell me. I hope not. But if that's the intention, we better be a little more explicit, please. I hope not. The last question has to do with, again, beginning with the end in mind, from a governance perspective, we're eventually going to be getting to what's known as H13. It's not mentioned, unfortunately, in the staff report, but at some point, when we start to implement this thing, we're going to be implementing an infill residential development permit area, I believe, as part of in addition to the zoning regulations.
Let me just ask the question of staff of that. Is that a part of the deliverables of this in the end, or is that just one option that may come out of this, Mr. Anderson?
Thank you, Your Worship. Perhaps I can clarify. We do currently have an infill development permit area in our community plan right now. It does apply community-wide, so you don't see a map particularly, but we do have guidelines and we do have a DPA that is associated with infill currently. I think perhaps the comment that should be added to that is that as we go through exploring housing options, respecting infill, and if in fact council does give some direction on implementing some or all of those housing options that we study, we would likely look at the development permit area language and see if that needed to be modified to better reflect possible new housing type options for infill. So there is a component there, but I just thought I'd clarify, we do have a development permit area for infill housing proposals now in our community plan. Thank you.
Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Well, that's news to me. I couldn't find. I saw it referenced in H13, but maybe offline I'll speak with staff. I saw all the other development permit areas, but I didn't see that one. But I did see the fact that it said that it should be established in established neighborhoods. So, which to me it says that it doesn't apply in the uplands and it doesn't apply in some of the other areas or parts of Oak Bay that are not established neighborhoods. So, is that my understanding? Is that correct? I should say to staff.
Sure, not to go down too far down this rabbit hole, but Mr. Anderson.
Yes, Your Worship, that is correct. And for Councillor Zelka's reference, it's section 8.3.1, page 179 in our official community plan. I hope that's helpful. Thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Zelka, you have the floor still.
Thank you very much. So, if we were I just need clarification in terms of where we're going with this, because I like knowing how we have control mechanisms, and I'm uncomfortable without knowing the control mechanisms. And this suggests that with the residential in residential development permit area aspects on page 179, that we will be able to form and character of infill housing. And I just want to confirm that that is the intent. We can do that today, I presume, because I understand for a house when we're not using that, we can't regulate form and character for a single family home.
Mr. Anderson?
Yes, Your Worship, and I do apologize if I go into the weeds on this, but in fact, there's a requirement in that development permit area that if you need a rezoning in order to create a lot, you then are subject to this development permit area. Otherwise, you're not, if we're clear. So there's an exemption there that basically says anything that goes ahead without zoning does not have to apply to the development permit.
And I get the impression with many of these housing types, especially if we're subdividing lots, there will most likely be zoning, which means most likely this will apply, which means most likely we will be able to apply form and character to this infill.
And those are all answers that'll come through this process. Because
But again, beginning with the end in mind from a governor's perspective, it's helpful to know where the heck we're going and how we're going to finally get there in order for me to feel comfortable with the beginning of the project. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Before I go to Councillor Patterson and Councillor Green, you had your hand up. Did you wish to speak to something? I just want to, I'm just going to ask one quick question that hasn't been asked yet, and then I'll go back to second time. There was just a question I had from speaking with members of the UVic Student Society asking about the use of houses and the maximum density of non-related people living in houses and those sorts of questions. And I'm not entirely clear, and perhaps Mr. Anderson, you can explain to me, is the use within the zoning types part of this discussion, or is that a separate discussion under zoning details within the housing forms that were being considered?
Thank you, Your Worship, and it is the latter. The issue of the number of people per dwelling unit is in the general provision in a zoning bylaw regulation. You typically don't assign numbers of persons within different housing types, like 4 in a duplex and 2 in a house. Do you know what I mean? You have general provisions around your broad perspective on the number of unrelated people living in a dwelling unit. But this study particularly is looking at housing types, housing forms, and it's those that represent increasing or not the number of people living within an area. So if it's a duplex, you get potentially more people than if it's a single family dwelling without a suite, for example. I hope that's helpful. Thank you.
It's helpful. Yes, thank you. I just wanted that clarification to know if that was part of this discussion or not. I'm going to go to Councillor Patterson, then Green. I'm going to reiterate a couple of things that I've heard here being spoken to. One was just in this document or in the introduction pieces to highlight the background and the feeder for this, including the OCP and the housing needs piece. I think I'm hearing a little bit just about that need to articulate that we're looking at those housing needs and mapping those to various types of housing forms, and then looking at those in the design and how they would fit in the community and the pros and cons of each of those is sort of the output. And I'm hearing that the advisory planning committee or commission should be engaged in this as much as possible through the process, so that we're getting the benefit of their time and energy looking at this in a bit more detail as it's going, even if just as from an oversight perspective to have that. So that's kind of what I've heard so far. I'm not sure how much of that impacts the details of the charter as it's listed, but I think it's important to capture some of the comments made. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Mayor. And I just, perhaps maybe I'm sensitive to this, but I will just say that for the underused APC, we will only, as a newly formed APC, be having our first meeting next week. So I do think we all look forward to being used, but I wouldn't say we're underused right now because we're not quite formed yet, but we're getting there. So just, and I am, I'm very pleased to hear support for involvement of the APC on this undertaking. And I do like the suggestion of it being a regular monthly item on every APC agenda, because I think that there may be an opportunity to move things forward concurrent to what is going on. But I am going to come back to the charter, and I appreciate very much what Mr. Anderson said about not expecting it necessarily to be an operational charter. So I'm going to come back to it as an upper level, perhaps executive level or government level charter. And what I would like to understand on this, and some of my colleagues around the council table have have touched on the base that we're going into this in the summer months when it can be, it can be very difficult to engage during pandemic. And it can be very difficult to engage during summer months. And I think you put the two together, and it's not optimal timing, certainly in going forward with this. And so to that, what I don't see in this charter, and that I would very much like to see, is benchmarks for public participation rates that would, we can have agreement on that we need to hit this target rate of participation to have confidence for us to move this forward. And then within that, perhaps benchmarks set for each of the options on housing. So we may not have uniformity across all of them, but we may have one or two options, for instance, that have a high level of uptake, a high percentage of acceptability. So if we could have some way of determining that and having that come back to the council table, so we could say, perhaps, don't hold it all up, move forward on this one or two items. For instance, duplexes already exist within the community. There may be take up for that. So if it came back and we had a high percentage rate on that and very low response on other things, we hold it all waiting for completion, or is there a way that we can develop measurements that allow council or aid council's decision-making in how we can move this forward in the best interests of the community, because it will affect the entire community. And what I might be thinking is a good level of participation may not be what others think. And if we get very low level of participation because of the timing of this, is that acceptable to my colleagues around the council table? I think, those types of things it's really the measures at the high level to move forward with each step. I don't see that in this charter, and that's what I would like to see in the charter.
So if I understand you, you would like to, under column 1, where project commences, you would like development of public participation targets as part of that.
Yeah.
You don't need
Yeah,
them. You don't,
I
obviously
would-
we can't provide those now, but you would like to see those developed as part of the project plan.
Yeah, if we got 60% uptake, then we might feel confident in moving something forward. If we only get 10% uptake, we might say, well, do we know if it's because the community don't want it, or just simply because we did not get response on this? So we're going to have to determine what our breakpoints are, I think, at a very high level that will permit us to move forward. Is that?
Yep, I'm just trying to think of how that could be the project plan. It sounds more like you're just looking for a public participation plan, a more detailed plan coming forward, because I think
we haven't had discussion around the council table on this and engagement. What do we all, what do we think? This hasn't come to council for discussion and at that type of level, and I think it could play an important role in how we look at this, and then how we might, as a council, come to decisions and saying, fine, this one seems good, let's move this forward, let's take it to the policy development on this one, so we can keep these things moving forward, and we don't let the whole housing plan framework die because we don't have something for just one piece missing. That's what I'm afraid. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure I quite understand the concern on that one. I think it's ultimately this body's choice as we move forward, whether or not how we move forward as we get through those stages. But I hear what you're saying. Ms. Varela, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Your Worship. So as we've discussed, council has the option to control scope, budget, or timeline. And so the direction staff has received to date there's a timeline before you that you folks have benchmarked for us. The budget you've defined for us, and we're trying to bring you a project that fits within that. At any time, council can change any of those pieces of the puzzle. You can add more budget, you can extend the timeline. But if we're talking about there could be decision points at which point the scope of the project could expand or contract. That's a risk the contractor will have to know up front. We'll have to build it into the RFP, and council will have to be willing to tolerate the requests for budget expansion or a timeline extension. So again, the project as defined fits within the $120,000. It fits within the timeline, and council has the ability to change scope. You just can't control all 3 points of that triangle at the same time, as we know with project management. So again, staff takes direction. It's also useful for the public to understand those pieces of project management as well.
Thanks, Ms. Varela. Councillor Patterson?
Yes, thank you. And the one piece that is missing, and I know it's not part of the charter, but hopefully it will come back within the framework of some discussions, but that is the holistic goals of what we are trying to achieve for the community, what we would like to see for the outcome in terms of density and valuation comparisons, perhaps in the marketplace, how it fits with our management of green spaces and whatnot. So there's the holistic aspects of it. That may be something also that could be given consideration to the APC taking a look at and making recommendations. So I just throw that out there because the housing goes beyond the housing framework and the options for that to its impact on the community, from everything from water runoff mitigation to use of green spaces or realignment of green space and whatnot. So it's broader than just the form of the housing that happens. I throw that out for comment too. And I don't know how or when that piece will align with this.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. I'm just going to observe we've been here an hour and 45 minutes, so we need to start getting towards the moving this document forward for either approval, changes, or sending it elsewhere. Councillor Green.
Thank you very much, Mayor, and thanks to my colleagues for all of their good questions. And I think most of mine have been addressed. Just 3 quick observations. One, I support the monthly check-in idea, the standing agenda item at the APC. I think that's a really, really good idea. I also think it would be helpful to lay out in detail the engagement tools that will be used for the benefit of the public ahead of time, just so people have a chance to think about them and how best to engage. If there are a number of choices or options, that would be helpful. And I also think it would be helpful somewhere in the material to define what we mean by a small lot. I think Councillor Braithwaite touched on this. How do we define a small lot versus a large lot? Again, I think that's really important information. I would say the average Oakville resident would not have that knowledge or information. And so, again, as we say, there should be no surprises in processes like this. So that would be helpful. And those are all my comments for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I think I can certainly see that the term small lots is going to cause consternation. So I think we may want to just consider adapting this so that it uses just lot subdivision or large lot subdivision to reflect the OCP language. Otherwise, we may just be spending a lot of time in the weeds trying to explain what's meant by that. So just in the interest of self-preservation, we might just want to make that change. Is there any? Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just in terms of moving things along, I would make the motion that the report titled Infill Housing Options for Neighborhoods Project Charter, authored by the Director of Building and Planning, be received.
So this is the first part of this. This is a more procedural piece. That's moved. Is there a seconder? Moved and seconded. Thank you. Is there any discussion on the receipt of the document? Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
Here we are. Thank you. Yes, this report makes reference to the small lot aspect. Is it possible that we could change small to large before we approve this receipt as an amendment?
Sure. Procedurally, I might just turn to staff on this one. I think we're not approving anything. We're just this is to receive this report. I think that language is more a matter of the charter itself. But I'll turn to Mr. Anderson in terms of recommendations for the receipt for the accompanying report. Mr. Anderson.
Yes, Your Worship, you are correct. It's the receipt of the report. It's not modify the report, but certainly the charter is open for consideration or modification by council. Thank you.
So if with the indulgence, I think I would prefer that we receive the report as is and then make changes to the charter, which is actually the direction going forward.
And then a final question, if I may.
Go ahead.
About that. So receiving the report does not also receive necessarily the appendix to the report. It's just the staff report. But we'll talk about the charter afterwards.
It's just this basically formalizes that we've received and read this report.
Okay.
We're not adopting anything unless we
Thank
move
you.
forward with the next phase of that.
Thank you.
So moved and second. Is there any other discussion on the receipt? Not seeing any. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you. Councillor Green, just so you know, your official hand is raised right now in the, it's okay. I know that was unintentional. It's not always visible on your own screen. Councillor Appleton, did you have a second part?
Yes, Your Worship. I would move that Council approve the project charter and direct staff to initiate the infill housing options for neighborhood project.
Okay, is there a seconder? Councillor Braithwaite, you're seconding. You're muted at the moment. So, but
Sorry.
I will.
Just for discussion, yes.
Well, it's on the floor then. Councillor Appleton, go ahead.
Yes, Your Worship. I think that I've heard from my council colleagues that there's concerns about certain elements of language. I guess I would encourage them to make an amendment to the motion to include the language that's necessary in their view. I think that I've made the motion because I think that, and I can be disavowed or I can be convinced otherwise, but I think that what I hear from council is that the bulk of what is contained within the charter document is usable and acceptable. So I put it on the table for approval with, and will await my colleagues' amendments if necessary.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Councillor Braithwaite, you were the seconder. Anything you wish to add or any amendments you'd like to make?
Yeah, I would like to amend the small lot to say the same language as what is in the OCP.
I think that's clear enough, Mr. Anderson. Is that acceptable? That amendment?
Yes, Your Worship, that's clear for staff. Thank you.
Okay. So is there a seconder then for that motion? Moved and seconded. Thank you. Is there any discussion on that? No motivation, no discussion. All right, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much. Councillor Braithwaite, you still have the floor. Is there anything else you wish to add?
Can you read your list again? Because now I've forgotten everything else that was on your list.
Well, my list included just some additional preamble in that report that gives a bit more background in terms of the housing needs and OCP,
Right.
to give some context to it. It doesn't change the structure of it, but it does provide that.
Would we need something that would ask that it would come back to the APC and the council meetings on a monthly basis?
Yes, I think that would be, if we could just, I think we deal with each of them one at a time, just so we can
Okay.
debate any changes on there.
So I would move that the information comes back to council and the APC on a monthly basis.
There's a seconder by Councillor Green. So there's no structure to that request. It's just essentially it would be a standing agenda item for both, and to be determined as needed what would be on that agenda item.
Right.
Before I go to comments on that, I just want to make sure that direction is clear and achievable from staff. So Mr. Anderson, this would go, your staff attend the Advisory Planning Commission meetings. Do you see any issue with us asking to have this as a standing item on the agenda, either for a verbal update or as needed, where it actually requires some input?
The principle, I don't have any concern with, Your Worship. Where it actually appears on the agenda, I might actually have to review that a little bit further. But as an item that is provided as an update at the regular APC meetings, that's something that staff can certainly do. Again, we don't always have APC meetings every month, and I just provide that as also some information for council. Thank you.
So I just want to make sure the wording is basically to be at an update at every APC meeting, I guess, from now until the end of this project charter.
Yes.
Is that okay? So not to call a special monthly meeting in August just so they could get an update. Okay, fair enough. That's I think that's clear in terms of the motion. So thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Councillor Green, you seconded. You want to add something?
Yes, I just wanted to ask if the APC is not meeting monthly, is there any purpose or use in having that agenda item on our council agenda as well for each of our meetings or committee of the whole meeting where the public can weigh in at the time? That's just a thought. I that's for consultation with staff and yourself at this point. I just wondered if there was, it seems to me if the APC isn't meeting on a regular basis, it would be helpful to have an update at a committee of the whole meeting where there is public participation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Braithwaite, your original motion, I apologize. I didn't write down the wording that you used there on that. I took it it was APC specific, was it?
I actually had included, I said council, but it should have actually been committee of the whole.
So I'm just going to put it there. It may be better as a council agenda item than committee of the
Okay.
whole, just because there are times under the procedures bylaw where only certain things go to the committee of the whole, and it may not be appropriate there. Maybe
So-
it'll definitely be meeting every month as a council.
So my original verbiage would have been correct then with council and APC.
So monthly updates to council and APC. I think you're okay with that as a seconder, Councillor Green? Okay, thank you. So that's the motion. Councillor Appleton, Zelka Patterson.
Well, thank you, Your Worship. I guess, and I think that I've heard this from Mr. Anderson, but I guess I just seek clarification or seek confirmation that if this is what is being asked of staff, that the nature of the update and the nature of the information to be provided is clear to staff. So I guess I would ask the mover of the motion to sort of, if Mr. Anderson needs a little bit more detail as to what the scope of that report would look like, I just ask for that to be clarified so that staff know what to expect.
Councillor Braithwaite, do you want to clarify, or should I just ask Mr. Anderson if he needs clarification?
If you can just ask Mr. Anderson if he needs clarification.
So Mr. Anderson, are you comfortable with that? The general wording and the type of information will vary by meeting, or do you wish to some more clarification?
Thank you, Worship. I was going to mention that it will vary depending on where we're at in the project, and I think for the most part, most often it will be a verbal update. And then at those key milestones where we have intended in this project to bring updates to commission and council, those will have more in a report or information format. So if that's clear and good for council, then staff are good. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor.
That would have been my intention for verbal or more in-depth if needed.
Thanks. Councillor Appleton, is that sufficient?
That makes sense to me, Your Worship.
Okay, Councillor Zelka, then I have Councillor Patterson.
Oh, thank you. I think Councillor Patterson was ahead of me, but if you'd like me to go, that's fine. So in terms of the update back to council and ideally the APC, that list in the project charter that within the phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 has a detailed list of items that are going on. It would be very helpful if that could structure some of the updates we receive, at the very least getting updates on these sorts of things as we proceed along, not only for our benefit, but in particular for the public's benefit, so they can see how we're moving forward, and ideally from a transparency perspective and expectation control, not really management, but educational aspects as well, in terms terms of where we're heading, since so this will be new to many people. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zalka. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to comment about the monthly update to the APC. In order for, I think, the value of the APC to be realized on the housing framework, I would like to see then the updates come to council so that council can review them. And if there are any areas that or items in the update that council wishes to have the APC comment or recommend on, come back to council, then council could give that directive, because otherwise what I'm taking it to mean is that it would only be an update and not something that the APC might receive as with instructions from council to actually consider at the meeting. Is that correct?
Mr. Anderson, I'm not sure. I think, or Ms. Varela, either one of you wish to answer?
Your worship, thank you. So yes, what I'm hearing from council is they would like regular verbal updates to both council sitting as committee of the whole and to the advisory planning commission. Throughout the process, council retains the right to direct certain aspects of the project to the advisory body for recommendation as per the terms of reference. So providing regular updates doesn't preclude council's opportunity to direct pieces of the project for recommendation to the advisory body, if that's clear, your worship.
I think that's clear. And I think it's also important to, Councillor Patterson, you'll have your work cut out, because there may be, conversations that come out there that might, spur you to come to the council table and share that input and perhaps make a motion to give some direction back again if that's the situation. So there may be a bit of an iterative loop in that scenario. And just for clarity, just to correct Ms. Varela, the motion is not to go to committee of the whole, but to council for the updates. Just want to make sure that we capture that correctly.
Your worship, sorry.
Go ahead, Ms. Varela.
Just that the procedure bylaw recognizes council sitting as either the body of council or the committee of the whole. It is always council that sits, regardless of the structure.
Oh, fair enough. You just said that it would be coming back to committee of the whole on a regular basis, but the motion just reads as council at this point. I just want to make sure that if anybody's watching that they understand, there's no, and council's not confused, because we've changed that a couple of times in terms of clarification.
Thank you, your worship. It's always council sitting as a body. Thank you.
Thank you. And anything else, Councillor Patterson?
Yeah, I thank you for that clarification, Mayor. And that's what I was really seeking, to understand my role with the APC, so that they are not, the APC is not simply receiving the update on the housing simply as a document to read, but feel that they can make comments for me to bring back to council if they they have a feeling that something should come back to council, so that I will then feel free to do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. I think it's important for the APC and for council and for the public and for staff to all agree. I mean, this is a tight timeline. It's the intention here of taking a holistic look at the housing needs and the options for bringing housing back. It's a tough one from a timeline perspective. Every good idea is welcome at any stage of this process, and so no doubt we'll be, as we go forward, we'll make some corrections and adjustments. And I think we have to just keep an open mind to good ideas from wherever they come from, and I think that's an important loop. And I'm hoping we'll learn in this process how to use the APC effectively as well in that process. So I had Councillor Zelka and Councillor Green on the motion. This is the motion to amend to include a monthly update.
Thank you very much, Chair. No, I very much appreciate the fact that the most likely the liaison to the commission would be utilized maybe more effectively to ensure that the information flow is both is two-way as appropriate. And I appreciate the suggestion to bring this forward as a way of ensuring that this project succeeds, since with opportunities for small changes as we move forward as more information comes in. I wanted to also ask one more other question. about this. Yes, when it comes to council, this is a special committee of the whole, but we had to do a special provision in order for the public to be able to speak. At some point, the public will be able to speak, I presume, assuming there is any member of the public. When we have the status update at the council, whatever that is, committee of the whole or council, hopefully the public will have a chance to weigh in or at least provide comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. I'm going to deal with this amendment, and then I'm going to go and reach out to the public if there's anybody wishes to address council. Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Yes, and I'll be brief. I just want to say, I hope everyone understands that the importance of the updates are really to keep, I think during a time when we all, some of us, I think a lot of us, including staff in the community, feel really disconnected from one another, it's really helpful to have this ability to check in every month on this particular project. I mean, it's useful on any project, but this one in particular, where the community is such a key component. So I hope everyone understands that, the reason I'm supportive of this motion is that it means that we stay connected to the project in a way at a time when we're not well connected to the work and to each other and to staff. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I don't see any other hands up. I'm just going to lend my support to this motion. I think this is, I think it's very important for us just to keep, this is one of the really big priorities of this council. And we really want to see it successful. And I think even if it's just a very light touch, it's good to make sure that there isn't a 2-month gap or something where things are not looked at. And to Councillor Green's point, I think this is a way for the public to understand what's going on in a regular and transparent fashion. So appreciate this amendment. Not seeing any other discussion. So all those in favor of the amendment? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much. So we have an amended motion right now, which is to approve the project charter to, oh shoot, my my first part I've lost here. What was the first amendment that we had, Ms.
The
Williams?
large lots, to take out the small.
Oh, right, changing the
Replace
wording
it
from
with
large
large
lots to lots, yes. And then the second item is just to include monthly updates as part of this. With that, I'm happy to go to the members of the public who wish to address council on this agenda item. Ms. Williams, do we have members of the public who wish to speak?
Nobody at this time, Your Worship.
Okay, I will come back again to the public. However, if you do wish to speak, I would encourage you to call in now, as there will be just probably a few more minutes on this topic before we get to a direction. At that, so we have an amended motion on the floor. Is there and you have Councillor Green, your hand is up. Is that something you wish to add? No, it's just still up. Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much, Chair. I need to ask one more clarification question, if I may, of staff, since this may be the last opportunity before this juggernaut starts moving towards its ultimate end. I did want to ask, in particular, in the OCP on page 83, the infill residential H12, whatever these paragraphs are called. Policy, H12 policy. It's partially referenced in the staff reports, but not fully. So I just wanted to ask through you, please, to staff to clarify. H12 policy for infill residential, in the second half of that paragraph, basically talks about what needs to be in place prior to considering infill housing, in terms of making sure that we have the various developed criteria and guidelines, review proposals, evaluate contextual fit in consultation with the public. Apparently that needs to be completed first before we do the first half of that paragraph. I just wanted to ask staff, is that their understanding, and how will that be achieved, please?
Thank you, Mr. Zelka, or Councillor Zelka. Mr. Anderson, over to you.
Thank you, Worship, and through you. No, I think that's just a language convention. You would not be doing policy and guidelines prior to deciding whether or not you were going to do policy and guidelines. So what that really is referring to is that prior to allowing for infill housing, there should be these things in place. And that's developed criteria guidelines, which is what the infill study is heading toward doing. And then of course, we are evaluating the contextual fit as part of this study, and we're engaging in consultation with the public. So I think we're meeting the intent of the official community plan as we carry forward with this study. Thank you, Your Worship.
Councillor Zelka.
One last question, if I may, focusing on contextual fit. Is the intent to have, how do I say this, whatever we come up with be applied throughout the established neighborhoods in a uniform way? Or is it possible that we could have, for example, do it on a neighborhood basis or do on some other basis that may come out of this, study of policies? Is it possible we could look at this on a neighborhood by neighborhood basis instead of within the OCP, the entire district termed established neighborhoods?
Go ahead, Councillor, Mr. Anderson. And we just, if you can get Ms. Williams, can you mute the two callers? Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Anderson.
Thank you, Worship. If I may, in response, I don't think I'd want to prejudge what comes out of this process, nor what Council's direction may be. And I don't really want to weigh in and provide advice on whether or not you should sub out an approach when we haven't really explored the approach yet. So if I could defer that until we're a little further. Your Worship, thank you.
I apologize. What I'm asking is do we have the mechanisms to allow it? Could that be an option that we could consider going forward? Is this option available to us? I'm not asking whether we should do it or not. I'm not asking you your opinion as to whether we should do it or not. I'm asking you, could we do it?
Mr. Anderson.
It certainly, Your Worship, depends on what it is you're doing. You could, for example, if I take zoning, for example, you could craft a zoning overlay district for parts of the community as opposed to the whole community. I mean, there's a whole range of tools that become applicable when you look at this. So that's why I was hesitant to say, oh yes, you could do this across the board for this topic. But I guess I'll give and say that it is possible. There are tools available. Okay, thank you.
That's helpful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. I don't see other hands up at the moment. I do see, I think we've had a couple of people who have called in to participate from the public. So with that, I'm happy to move over to callers from the public if they're calling to speak on this topic. We are on item 3.1, infill housing options, the project charter. Ms. Williams, is that correct? We have two callers who have indicated, and I see one hand raised. So am I okay to start calling on callers?
Absolutely, Your Worship. We do have two callers, and just a reminder to them to use *9, and that will raise their virtual hand, and we'll be able to call them by the last 3 digits of their phone number.
Sure. So I'll call first the caller with the last 3 digits, 033. If you would like to unmute by hitting *6, then you are welcome. If you just ask that you provide your name, municipality of residence, and try and keep your comments to around 3 minutes.
Hello?
Hello, we can hear you. Welcome.
It's Curtis Hobson. Municipality of residence is Oak Bay.
Welcome, Mr. Hobson.
Yeah, just a few points. There's been no mention, or I think Councillor Patterson mentioned it a little bit. There's been no mention of the infrastructure in the district. It seems like while the project's admirable in itself and aspirational, I still think it's a bit of a cart before the horse thing. That's one of my comments. The other thing is the ramifications of actually subdividing lots. So we know that if you subdivide a lot in Oak Bay, you have $1 million added to your property because now you have $1 million lot to sell. And then who's on the hook for the infrastructure upgrades for that lot? I'd like to also remind council that there's a project that didn't go through that was going to add 96 sinks and toilets to the district, and the infrastructure implications for that were between $1.5 and $3 million, 6 blocks away from the project due to the lack of capacity. And I know the Bowker development got around the lack of pipe capacity in a very innovative way, but I don't think we want to do that through the whole district. And my last point is I would kind of agree with Councillor Zelka that council needs to determine where they want infill and density. I think it's just too big to deal with it across the entire district because of the infrastructure. So decide where you want it, upgrade the infrastructure in that area, and then infill. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Hobson. Next, we have the caller with the last three digits, 907. If you could hit *9 to raise your hand, and or stars and then *6. I think hit *9 if you wish to speak. If I don't see that hand raised, then we will come back to this table. Again, that's caller with the last three digits, 909 showing.
Your worship, that's 907.
Oh, sorry, 907. Yeah, hand raised. So if you could just go ahead and hit *6 to unmute. You'll be joining our meeting. And again, same ask. If you could give your name, municipality of residence, and keep your comments to around 3 minutes. And welcome, sir.
Can you hear me?
Or ma'am. Yes, we can.
You can hear me?
We can. Welcome.
Welcome. Okay. Well, first of all, I'm quite upset that I'm being timed, so don't start me yet.
Well, that's okay. Excuse me. Can you just give your name and municipality of residence? And
my name is Anthony Mears, and I am a resident of Oak Bay, South Oak Bay.
Great. And the 3 minutes isn't a firm rule. We're just give it as a guideline.
Well, you know, it's a kind of a big ticket item. And first of all, you know, before I get started, even you've approved something without any resident input. How transparent is that? That's crazy. I mean, I have a lot of problems with this report. For example, you raised compatibility. It's going to be compatible with the community, but how are you doing with monster or mega houses? How are you controlling that? That's not going too well. So that you want a leap of faith on the other. I think that's going to be a problem. Anyway, I'll get started. First of all, there's a lot of concern about the word charter, and I understand that Mr. Anderson keeps talking about study, charter, study, charter. It should have been called a study. A charter sounds like an authority, and we know about wording. I pointed out to people that it could have been worse. It could have been called an edict or a proclamation or maybe a constitutional amendment. That would have made it even more problematic. Okay, so you have Oak Bay Watch's submission, and so I'm not going to repeat some of that information, but you can start timing me now if you like. The housing objectives, housing objective number 1 in the OCP talks about support a modest expansion of housing. This doesn't sound anywhere near like a modest expansion of housing, and I don't know how you would probably think you're going to control it. I want to point out, what do we know for sure? And I really like the last residents' comments about the infrastructure. So we know what we have. We have a serious financial problem, and we have taxes going up year after year, and we have a promise of the future they're going to drop, but promises, you can't take promises of future to the bank. We have a serious failing infrastructure problem, we know that, and we have a serious zoning inconsistency problem. Now, council has warned about inconsistency for some time. So what does that mean? It means that the zoning is being driven by chance, not by design. It's up to the developer to determine the size of the house. Okay? So,
Mr. Mears, are you still there? Okay, sorry, you drifted off.
Okay, so this is confirmed by a member of the 214 FAR committee who said that too many exemptions were permitted, and so that means that houses right now are not, they don't match the streetscape. So the designs are really profit driven. Bigger the house, the more the profit. The infill project charter bundles all infill together. The problem with this is that's not good planning. An infill all infill and infill problems are not created equal. For example, if the zoning is not corrected first, you will end up with another Newport problem. I remember the controversy around that, where the infill unit was very, very big, and there was concern about the infrastructure on Linksys. And the director of planning said that if it was a couple more of those, then you'd have to tear all of Linksys up. So I guess what I'll wrap up with is that I think you have to take care of the infrastructure first before you start adding all this new capacity. There has to be some efficiencies have to be made so there's enough revenue to meet the service demand for new population. And if you don't control the zoning, you won't be able to control development. I mean, it's that simple. And I think before you move ahead, you're going to blow 120,000. I think you better make sure that those district priorities or even community priorities are taken care of first. That's my input.
Thank you, Mr. Mears, and thank you for joining us this evening. And thank you for your correspondence, the letter that you wrote as well. It's good to hear from you. I would say, just for those watching, I think infrastructure has been the primary focus over the last 2 years as we've struggled to fund and restructure in a way that allows us to start tackling that infrastructure. But certainly any additional housing will have some impact on that. They have to be taken together. I don't see any other hands raised or callers in. Ms. Williams, is there any other callers that have reached out to us?
No, Your Worship, no other callers at this time.
Okay, thank you very much. If I can just, thank you. Councillor Braithwaite, you have your hand up?
Yeah, Mr. Mears reminded me of something that I had meant to ask about, and that was whether or not we should be including in the charter the housing objectives from the OCP 4.3.1. Because I think that would really go a long way to explaining some of the process and to basically assure people that it's a continuation of a process. So I'm wondering if perhaps if my colleagues are in agreement that we might add that to the community charter, and that would be, I believe there's nine or 10 points in the housing objectives, and Mr. Anderson could probably confirm that for me.
If I might make a suggestion, if this is going to turn to a motion, it may make sense for there to be essentially a covering letter to the charter that includes the background of the points raised between the housing needs report, the OCP, including that section, because I think those all are inform the rationale for moving this charter forward, and leave it a little bit general so that cover letter could be added as part of the official document. Without having to wordsmith it here, but Mr. You asked it more in the form of a question in terms of if we could add that, and Mr. Anderson, that's a specific piece that she's referring to as the I forget what it was called, the housing objectives of the OCP. So that would be that's a rational thing to include in there as part of the background. Is that feasible as part of the background information that could be added as a rider?
Thank you, Your Worship. If I'm clear, the proposal is to put that information in a cover letter, or is the proposal to put it in the charter itself?
Perhaps we'll just take your direction on that, Mr. Anderson.
Okay.
I don't know if it's possible to do a cover for it, but I just we recognize we're here to kind of essentially approve the charter, but we're asking for some additional background information to be included so that the rationale and the reasons and the structure for that is a bit more clear.
Thank you, Worship. And I ask in part because if I may, an objective or objectives are a fairly high level within the community plan, and they in fact relate more to the strategic initiative direction and the higher level direction for what you might do. But particularly this set of objectives are actually quite broad and are intended to be and encompass more than housing and more than infill housing in particular. So it's it's there in the background as our overriding objectives that feed the policies that then feed the projects that we undertake to meet those policies and objectives in the community plan. So I just, if I may, I don't think it's necessary for us to put an objective level set of statements in a project charter. We certainly, as I note, are going to be making reference to the community plan and the directions that provides for the charter. But I would hesitate to recommend including the set of objectives that are referred to in the actual charter. And I'm not sure, in terms of a cover letter, I think our intent is to, if I may, I'm kind of going on here, but if I may, our intent is to try and make sure that we've got that housing needs report and that OCP context noted and stated in the project charter itself. So staff has that message. That motion is either on the table or has been passed. I can't recall right now. But I wouldn't recommend us including a set of objectives that are for a wider sort of scope and are at a fairly high level relative to where we're at in a project charter. Thank you, Worship.
Sure. And just for clarification of our motions, we don't actually have any motion to specifically reference the housing needs or the OCP in the document. And Ms. Vrelli, your hand is up.
Your Worship, I thought I had heard that, so my bad.
Thank you, Your Worship. So it might be of use for council to know that staff anticipates creating a website, which would include background materials such as the OCP excerpts and things like that. Staff recognizes it's important to have those multiple pieces that council has referenced tonight in the discussion available for the public all in one place. So certainly we'll make that happen, Your Worship.
Yeah, Councillor Braithwaite, it's not a motion right now. You asked it as a question. So are you satisfied with that approach?
I am. I think that if it's accessible, the housing objectives as well as other things that we've talked about tonight are accessible, easily accessible by residents, then that would suffice for me. Okay,
thank you, Councillor Zelka. You have your hand up.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I'm uncomfortable supporting the motion as it's currently stated, unless it specifically references the OCP and the housing needs report. So I'd like to move a motion, an amendment to this motion that the project charter includes reference to the OCP and the housing needs report.
I mean, I don't think we need to wordsmith. I think you just want to include that as clear, just as a statement in the preamble in the project overview. Before I get a seconder, I'm just going to go to Mr. Anderson. Do you have any concerns about including a reference to those two items, not with details, but referencing those in the project overview portion of the project charter?
Through you, Your Worship, no concerns. Thank you.
Okay. So is there a seconder for that motion? Seconded. Thank you. Is there any discussion on that?
I'll just add, if I may.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's rather important to me. I would like to see if Councillor Braithwaite was going to move it, I was going to second, because I would like to see those objectives explicitly laid out. Since if the infill is not meeting those objectives, then I'm not quite sure what we're doing, because that actually helps to inform maybe the infill that's done elsewhere into an Oak Bay context. So if we're at least referencing the OCP, which effectively pulls in those objectives plus other aspects that are specific to Oak Bay, and of course the housing needs report that fills that out even more with some more up-to-date information, I can consider supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Is there any other discussion on that? Adding those? Not seeing any. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much. I'm looking at my notes here. I don't see anything else. I think it's worthy, though, just as we had two callers call in and both reference the very real issue of our capacity of infrastructure. They are not unrelated, and certainly we need to, as we're doing our infrastructure planning, that's definitely informed by what we expect to have in the way of housing. So they're sort of, the cart before the horse goes both directions. We can't, if we replace pipes that are too small, we can't build housing. If we don't have the pipes, the housing plan in place, we can't do the good pipe planning and vice versa. So Mr. Huron, perhaps you're on the, I see that you're on the call here. If you're listening at this stage, are you, I'm assuming perhaps you can just give us some comfort that there's discussion happening between the engineering department and the building and planning department as these conversations happen, to provide some feedback in this process on the capacity of pipes and some additional impacts, depending on the area of the community.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Absolutely. I think the best way to answer this question is within the asset management program, which deals with the district's requirements for infrastructure now and through the next, let's call it 100 years. But in a shorter time frame, the main projects that we have going that have started already and we're continuing is the master plans, the stormwater master plan, water, sewer, sanitary sewer, and related plans such as those. A fundamental part of those plans is looking at the system as it currently exists, just in terms of the condition, but also the capacity and factoring in things like growth. So it's growth of, say, for example, climate change. So assessing what's the environmental impacts, but also assessing what's the community going to do. And different communities have different growth profiles and different assumptions that drive what changes have to be made to maintain a system over time. But absolutely, this is these questions about what the needs going forward are is fundamentally part of the asset management planning that's actually happening now or about to begin.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that update. I think it's just important for the public to hear that things are not operating in silos on this front. Are there any other changes or amendments? Or if not, I see a hand up by Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much, Chair. I definitely want to be moving this along since I do notice it's almost 8:30. I'd like to move a referral of this item to the Advisory Planning Commission. I see that they're having a meeting coming up on the 4th of May, and basically to ask them to comment on the charter and provide their input.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Before I get a seconder, I'm just going to, I see Ms. Varela has her hand up on that one, so I just want to make sure we get input from staff. Ms. Varela.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I just would request clarification again, if this is for information or if it's a referral for comment back to council. So those are two distinct tasks for the advisory body. And if it is a referral for recommendation back to council, then what information exactly is council seeking, please?
Again, you clarified that earlier about the we've established a timeline and a budget, which leaves some difficulty, wiggle room for other pieces of that. So I think it's a fair question, Councillor Zelk, if maybe we could clarify.
Yes, it absolutely is a fair question. And if the ADP, Advisory Planning Commission wasn't meeting next week, then I just wanted to take advantage of that opportunity. And it would be asking them for comment. And of course, this body could come up with the various questions, not unlike what you did, Chair, at the last meeting where you surveyed council members for the various questions of clarifications that we could go through. At the very least, I would like the APC to provide comment and any suggestions back that council should consider at this time.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Zelka. Is there a seconder for the motion? Seconded, thank you. You've sort of motivated already as part of your motion. Anything else you wish to add, Councillor Zelka?
No, I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
So you're referring it for comment, for general comment. Is that what I heard from the?
Unless council comes up with any additional questions, yes. We are putting it on the standing order, a standing agenda, and I just wanted to include the APC. It would also start an aspect of the public engagement as well. So it shows demonstrably that we want their input.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Mr. Anderson, I see your hand up.
Oh, Your Worship, I thought Ms. Varela had her hand up, but that might have been left from the.
Fair. I thought it was left up from before, Ms. Varela. No, it's down now. So.
Okay. So I think just to reiterate, I'm not sure the agenda's already been published for APC, so this would have to be a late item for staff. I'm not sure if staff would be in a position to prepare materials and bring that in the context of asking for comment. And maybe just to restate, if in fact that is the case, then that would mean we'd be bringing this back to council at a subsequent meeting for approval of the project charter. Am I understanding this motion correctly? Because I just wanted to restate that we are looking at adding another month or so to the process, if in fact that is the nature of this motion. Thank you, Your Worship.
It'd be 2 weeks at least if there's any changes. Councillor Zelka, is that the intention to?
I certainly don't want to be a delay aspect causing a delay, but I definitely would like the APC to feel included in this process, especially since we're going to be making a standing item on their agenda, and we're wanting their input. Plus, during the pandemic, this is a wonderful opportunity to demonstrate that we value their input. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So a referral is a formal referral process. I'm guessing just for interest of timing there. Is it if this can go on as a late agenda item for update for that body, and if there's any suggestions or directions that come out of that update that Councillor Patterson could bring back to make some modifications to this, is that an acceptable process, or would you prefer it to go be referred, considered, get that feedback, and then bring it back to council before we make that approval, Councillor Zelka?
I apologize. Could you use different words? I didn't quite understand.
No, fair enough. I just, there's the motion includes the words of referring this. So this is a formal referral of council to the APC, essentially asking them for formal input on this, and we'll capture that, come back to this table, consider that input before making a recommendation. The alternate side of that would be to not make it a formal referral, but just have it on have it added to their agenda as a late item for their review. And if there's any comments or suggestions or ideas that come out of that could be brought back through their liaison to the next council meeting to tweak the charter as it goes forward.
I see what you're suggesting, and I would be fine for either methodology as long as the APC has an opportunity to assist in this time of pandemic to provide feedback to council. Okay,
I'm not sure if that's, I've said that out loud, but I think that might add a little lack of clarity into their expectations as well. So I see Mr. Anderson and Ms. Varela's hands up. So I'll go to Ms. Varela since she's the boss.
Thank you, Your Worship. So perhaps if this would meet council's needs, if staff provided an overview, walked the advisory body through the charter as it exists, details out where touchstones would come back to the APC for input, such as the communication plan, things like that. The advisory body may also have questions about those foundational pieces. Perhaps you could inform the body about the website and compiling background materials. So perhaps council would seek future consultation when there was actually a deliverable that the advisory body could weigh in on, but they could be presented this information just with a verbal accompaniment about this is how we got to this point. This is a very high level framework. This is the direction council has given to date, and that council is committed to involving the advisory body going forward with those monthly touchstone points, and to have that tone of conversation rather than a formal referral or comment. Again, because I'm curious as to what you're inviting comment on. So again, staff is seeking clarification.
Thank you, Ms. Varela. Go ahead, Councillor Zelka.
And thank you very much. And this the suggested non-formality aspect to provide a way that doesn't slow this process down maybe allows us to proceed with the agenda, the motion as it appears. But if it did appear on the APC's agenda for next week in the format and with the explanations as laid out by our CAO, that would definitely satisfy me as long as the seconder agreed.
Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Mayor. And my rationale for seconding the motion was that I hear what Ms. Varela says, and it is very good advice. What I would be looking for is the formality of referring it to the APC with the directive that they receive the information, review the information, And if they have questions about the information and the project charter as it is put forward, that we collect those questions right at the beginning of the process. And then, hopefully staff will be able to respond to those questions at the meeting. There may be more information that they need to acquire, but I think it would be, I certainly would be interested as the liaison and as a council member to hear their response and their understanding of the project moving forward. I think that would be helpful. And so that was why I was looking more for the formal referral in this instance, and thereafter updates on a monthly basis. So that was my rationale for supporting it.
So you prefer to keep the motion as it is?
I would prefer to keep it as a formal introduction of this to the APC, so that it is a clear messaging that there is an expectation that they will have a role and a commitment to following this process closely and being familiar with it, and any pertinent data. There may actually be members of the Advisory Planning Commission who are not totally familiar with the OCP and some of the attachment documents that are going to be with it. So, there may be some updating of some of the new membership. I don't have a feel for that yet. So that's why I supported the formal referral. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. So the motion on the table is referral. Referral is a formal process. It stops our consideration of it and moves it to the APC, and it'll come back to this table probably in whatever 3 or 4 weeks time for us to then consider this issue again. So I make sure we're all understanding that.
Do we have a clear date on when it would come back? Would it delay significantly this?
Ms. Williams, you have the schedule there. It would come back to a council meeting, and depending what comes out of that, it would come either to the next council meeting or the meeting after.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. It would depend on what came out of that and how quickly staff could turn it around. The APC is meeting on the 4th. The next council meeting is 6 days past that. That might be a bit quick for a turnaround, so we may have to go to the May 25th council or bring it back to a committee of the whole. My understanding is council is preferring that this come to the council meeting body. So the 25th of May.
We would need to do this as a council meeting because it's actually approval, not just discussion. So it would have to be that. So, okay, thank you, Councillor Braithwaite and Green.
Thank you, Mayor. I was hoping that Ms. Varela's explanation would have sufficed for especially Councillor Patterson, because as the liaison to the APC, that would have been important.
Oh, you just muted yourself, Councillor Braithwaite.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but is that not the first meeting of the APC, did you say? So, I mean, to me, that puts a heavy load on the APC for their very first meeting. I would feel, I think, more comfortable just to send it to them for the information, and ask them for some, information coming back from them, some comments coming back from them, or any questions that they might have. But I'm not sure if I really could support referring it, but I'd be interested to hear what my other colleagues have to say.
Councillor Green.
Sorry. Thank you, Mayor. And I would tend to agree with Councillor Braithwaite. My concern would be first meeting, what is the level of capacity and understanding? That's a fairly heavy document to hit them with right off the top. And and that's no diminution of them or their ability, but I'm wondering, I would agree with Councillor Braithwaite. It might be better just to provide the document to them. And if they want to ask questions about it, they could send that information back to Councillor Patterson as the liaison, or to staff directly, depending on how staff feels about that. But at any rate, I think that is a lot to ask new volunteers at their very first meeting. It took me a number of days to digest this material, and I still had questions about it. And I think all of us are a little more used to getting material like this. I would think it would be, a challenge. That's my feeling. Thank you.
The motion currently is a motion to refer Councillor Appleton, then Patterson, then Nay.
Thank you, Your Worship. So speaking against the motion to formally refer, I feel similarly to my colleagues in that I think staff have presented an option to move the information forward to APC in a provision of information capacity. I do agree with obviously with the idea of actively engaging with the APC, but I concur that putting this information in front of them at this juncture and asking them, if we formally refer, we are asking them to provide essentially provide information to council on how this would be modified or how the charter would be amended. I think that is a significant ask at this stage of the game. And I'm very concerned about the timeline. First and foremost, this is something that we need to act on quickly and we need to expedite. That's not to say that the APC shouldn't be engaged at all stages of the process, but rather than formally refer, I would rather we use the option to provide information and receive comments and potential questions back through the council liaison. Thank you, Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. I have Councillor Patterson, the name.
Thank you, Mayor. I didn't get to finish because other people put up their hands. So I didn't get a chance to finish. I was going to say if it was going to delay it until the 25th or 26th, whenever it was said, then I would go with the staff recommendations so that it could go on the agenda. But I do note that on the agenda for the APC is secondary suites. And so, you know, there's going to be perhaps some questions at that meeting about, okay, what are we working on? Secondary suites, housing infill, does it fit together? What, you know, what's the timeline, what the process? So at any rate, I will work with staff on that. Thank you.
Okay, I'm hearing the majority of people seem to be okay with this being a more informal process. So I'm going to go to Councillor Ney if you wish to speak to. Otherwise, I'll call the question.
No, yeah, I'm speaking against the motion.
Okay, so I'll call the question. So this is the motion. Oh, Councillor Zelka, you wish to speak?
Yes, thank you. I just want to confirm that with the friendly amendment, we're switching to a more informal way of having the APC being informed.
Right now, the motion is a referral motion.
Referral motion. Could we just go through a friendly amendment, or do you want to defeat this and then come up with a separate motion?
It's still in order, really. I think to if as the mover and seconder, if you wish to amend your original motion to just ask this to be included in their agenda for information. And
I wish to amend the motion as you just described and as laid out by our CAO.
Okay, thank you. Is that acceptable to you, Councillor Patterson?
Yes,
it is.
That's
okay.
Acceptable. Thank you.
Okay, so the motion is now not a referral motion. It is in fact just to ask staff to include this as a piece of for information and feedback from the informally to the Advisory Planning Commission. Is that clear enough, Mr. Anderson?
Yes, Your Worship. Thank you.
Thank you. So that is the motion on the floor. Any other discussion on that? Not seeing any. All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed. Thank you. Are there any other? Oh, go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
I was just going to move the recommendation that council approve the project charter as amended and direct staff to initiate the.
Oh, we've already had the motion. This is just we're making amendments. Yes,
right.
Councillor Appleton moved it.
Yes.
We've had now 3 amendments.
Right.
One substantive in terms of wording, and then 2 in terms of adding additional information and process. So otherwise, it is as largely intact from where it started. Is there any other changes that people wish to make on this at this time? I think this has been really valuable from my perspective to get some clarity in terms of what the expectations are, and yeah. So this has been a bit of a long process to go through this, but I think it's sort of helped to tease out a little bit of what people's actual expectations are. And I think that we're going to be very tight in terms of timelines and meeting all of the public engagement pieces. So if this moves forward, it'll certainly be an all hands on deck to get it done. So looking forward to that if it passes. Are there any other discussion on the motion? Not seeing any. All those in favor? Any opposed? I didn't see any opposed. That carries. With that, we will move on to item number, sorry, I'm just going to go back to my agenda here. 3.2, Oak Bay Avenue Tree and Sidewalk Rehabilitation Project. I'm not sure who we have to speak to this. Is it Mr. Haran?
Yes, Your Worship. I will start speaking to it if you're ready.
We are. Go ahead.
All right, thank you. So the Oak Bay Avenue Tree and Sidewalk Rehabilitation Project is a joint Parks and Public Works project to address some significant trip fall hazards along Oak Bay Avenue. This project started in 2020. Essentially, the structural roots of 4 Norway maples along the avenue were causing significant heaving of the sidewalks. So some of the background info is the trees were mislabeled by the nursery in 1990s when they were selected and planted, and they were essentially inappropriate for a treatment like Oak Bay Avenue because the roots are fast growing and invasive. So this has resulted in consistent sidewalk heaving and interference with underground infrastructure like water services for businesses, phone utilities, and so on. So Public Works is required to do consistent preventative maintenance over the years to mitigate the trip fall risk. But that's no longer an option going forward. In order to address the risks, the trees must be removed, the sidewalks repaired, and new, more appropriate trees planted in its place. So it is common in projects in Oak Bay, infrastructure projects, to find surprises. As we do our infrastructure rehabilitation projects, we're often surprised by what we find underground. Our records and our record keeping over the past 100 years has not always been up to the modern standards. So we often find things that are not meant to be there, or we find things that are there that we don't expect. And so normally we're able to incorporate these risks and uncertainties into our contingencies for project planning, so costs and schedule, and we usually manage it at the operational level. Other times, it can be a real struggle from a planning and project delivery perspective, and I don't think it's well known or understood how often these kinds of unexpected challenges occur as our municipal forces work throughout the community. So in the case of these trees, our current team's historical knowledge and understanding is that the district has been doing corrective maintenance on the sidewalks surrounding these trees for quite some time. These trees and the tripping hazard they've caused are a significant problem that require regular maintenance. So the project itself that started last year was delayed because of an unanticipated challenge, which we discovered during the design process to finalize the stormwater control. What we discovered is that the trees straddle or encroach on private property that is functioning as part of the public realm space of the avenue. So this report is to inform council and to seek permission to continue with the project to replace the trees and rehabilitate the associated surrounding sidewalks, recognizing that the work will need to be performed on both municipal and private property that makes up the public realm space on Oak Bay Avenue. And I'm ready to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Haran. Are there questions for Mr. Haran? Councillor Braithwaite, then Councillor Patterson.
Just a quick one, Mr. Haran. Thank you for this. It'll be really lovely to finally get the trees put back in on the avenue. Do we know what kind of trees yet that you might consider planting there? I know you put magnolias on the one side, but what's going to go in the front on Oak Bay Ave?
You have me stumped. I know that Parks has a plan and a good plan, and I don't know if David Brozick knows the answer to that one. I don't suspect he would, but I'll have to come back to you with a specific. It's probably the same as what they had around the corner on Hampshire, but I don't know that for sure, unfortunately.
Okay, not a worry. I just thought if you knew off the top of your head. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Haran. Councillor Braithwaite, Councillor Patterson, the Councillor Appleton.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. In reading this report and listening to Mr. Haran, I identified 2 separate, although related issues. And one is the legal issue related to the right-of-way and the authority that allows us to do the work that encroaches on the private area. And then the other is, of course, the repairs to the infrastructure. So in my mind, they're related, but somewhat separate issues. So if staff could perhaps help me understand what the legal issues are related to district authority and responsibility for this work if we don't have letters of agreement or a right-of-way easement. Appreciate.
Councillor Patterson, Mr. Haran.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. So I'm not a lawyer, so I don't want to make any kind of legal statements or provide advice in that realm. But from a staff perspective, the way that we're looking at this issue is that at least for quite some time, more than 5 or 6 years, I will say, just based on leadership in the Public Works and Engineering Department, we have been doing the preventative maintenance there, which is the grinding down on the sidewalks and putting in asphalt patches to keep residents from tripping and falling and hurting themselves in that area, just no matter where the property line specifically is. So there is a certain kind of responsibility that we have for the community in general. And part of our approach here is to say, there is a long-term plan for that needs to be determined for what to do about these trees and where they are. But in the short term, our proposal is to carry on, knowing that we do quite a lot of work that is right on the property line when it comes to connecting people to municipal sewer mains or water. Like, we're always right on that kind of that threshold. So our recommendation here is recognizing publicly that it is an unusual situation, but then in the interests of providing a safe walking pedestrian environment, that we carry on with the work in the short term, and then consider the longer term implications as a separate task connected to the Avenue area plan.
Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yeah, just to follow further on that, do we have any idea of what the time frame or complexities would be to even get letters of understanding from the owners of the buildings for the work to take place in the absence of easement right-of-way agreements?
Mr. Haran or Ms. Varela?
Well, I can start, and if I don't cover it all, then I'll let Ms. Varela jump in. I think the timelines that are driving us at the moment are two things. One, our cement crew is kind of the critical path, and they're committed elsewhere until the end of May. So at the earliest, we'd be looking at a concentrated effort to finish the work in the month of June, prior to the nice weather and the times when we'd want the avenue to be as perfect as possible without construction going on. And if we can't meet that timeline, then we're looking at trying to do it in the fall before the rainy season, but then the duration would be much longer because we wouldn't be able to concentrate it all at once because we'd have to wait for good weather. So delays in terms of trying to whatever additional administrative work would want to happen before starting, it would just mean that the avenue would stay looking as it would at least through the summer.
If I might continue then, to that end, the report doesn't really provide certainty of schedule for, in fact, removal of the stumps. And so I'm wondering what the risk is in unintended delays and any other options that we have to ensure that we have the least disruption and minimize impact to the public area.
Mr. Haran?
Yes, Your Worship. So there's a couple of options, and we didn't write the timeline specifically in the report because we do need to seek the direction from the council on the way ahead here. So we didn't want to speculate, but verbally, the plan would be, if we get consent to go ahead and do the work, then the idea would be to do an intensive, at the earliest, an intensive construction activity in June so that it's done prior to summer. And if the council or there was some other reason to delay, then we would have to do it. We could do it during the summer, but we didn't consider that to be a viable option. We just don't want to do such disruptive construction on Oak Bay Avenue in the summer while we're either recovering from a pandemic or still dealing with the pandemic, just from a business and enjoyment of the avenue perspective. So that would mean the third option, which is starting in roughly September. And then the downside of that option is that we wouldn't be able to do all of the trees all at once in a 3 or 4 week period. We'd have to do one tree at a time and then wait for the good weather in terms of doing the concrete work. So it might end up taking several months in smaller chunks. So the disruption in terms of actual construction and noise might not be the whole time, but then the avenue looks unfinished until we have it, until we are able to get it done.
Thank you for that information. Mr. Haran spoke about unexpected problems that can be created when you're dealing with underground services and not having all conditions identified. Can we in some way identify kind of the scope of the risk? Is the risk greater that staff anticipate that the roots will have caused more problem, or are things, when other trees were taken up, was the impact quite manageable? I'm just trying to gauge what the risk is, because it is our main avenue, and if we lose services, it's going to be very disruptive at an awkward time.
Sure. Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Mr. Haran?
Oh, that's a great question, and we're always struggling with risk management when it comes to technical risk management, and then there's the policy risk management and all the other things that go on with projects in terms of things that that can't predict in advance. So generally, there's always something going on underground that causes us problems, and that's fine. But we're used to that, and it's part of our projects, and it's what we expect. In this case, the unique aspect of this question is, it was the question of the property lines in the public realm space that delayed us. That's unusual. So if it wasn't for that, it would be done already. We would have finished it in January, and then the problems that would have occurred underground that we might still have are going to be problems that we kind of are used to. So that would mean maybe there's a water service that's actually more compromised than we expected, so we have to replace that. Or maybe there's some other thing happening underground which adds days or a week or two to our work, but not, it's not saying it can't happen, but it's unusual that something dramatic would go on. It's more of we're trying to say here, we would be done this already, but we stopped because this is an unusual issue that we thought needed council's attention and decision-making and guidance.
And
thank you, Mr. Grant. Councillor Patterson, before you go on, I just, can I get a motion of council to extend the meeting by, say, 20 minutes so we can, thank you, moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Not opposed? Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yeah, the last couple of questions I had, there was questions for council in the report about the absence of a village plan and the location of replacement trees, and the awareness that the placement of the trees in those locations may not be what is desirable in a village plan. So to that end, I would like confirmation that the locations where that they are going to be placed have known underground services or installations that would be compromised by the new trees going in, and then some understanding of cost implications of removing or relocating landscape, kind of short, long term. So kind of what's the value of this, so if there's.
Thanks, Councillor Patterson. Mr. Haran?
Yes, Your Worship. I'll do my best to answer the question as I understand it. I think a good assumption to make is when the trees were first planted, it implies that Public Works was there with Parks to dig the holes in the sidewalk, set it up properly, plant them, and then close it back up. So when they were doing that, they would have been, even if we don't have the records, our Public Works staff have the knowledge that whatever they put back in probably likely made sense as they were doing it. The issue here is that the roots grew in a way that wasn't expected because it was the wrong kind of tree. So the roots themselves is the real problem here, and why we're having heaving, and the roots themselves are what might be or likely interfering with infrastructure underground nearby. So as we take the trees away and put new ones in, it's likely going to be, there's a good chance that we won't have further complications there. The second part of the question is, and why we mentioned it in the report, has more to do with, at some point here in the near future, there's the area plan for Oak Bay Avenue work that's going to happen. And then there's the bigger picture. What does Oak Bay Avenue look like? Say, I'll pick a time far enough in the future to make it easy for discussion 20 years from now. What does the community want that street to look like? And that means, how wide are the sidewalks at that point? And what kind of street furniture will there be? And what about other on-street amenities? And that's the kind of thing that gets discussed during an avenue, plan discussion. And in that, we're just trying to highlight and flag to the council and the community that where the trees are right now, they might, through that process, the community might decide, well, we actually need to move them or do something different than what's there. So we're making the recommendation that for now, the trees are status quo, but there's a possibility that in the future, there needs to be either some work done to formalize where they are in terms of the property lines, or some other action might need to take place. And that would likely, that discussion and those exploration would happen likely during the area plans process.
Okay, so I take that to mean then that the changes in the future are somewhat of a minimal impact on the overall village when considered in the overall village plan that might be considered. If it is throwaway costs, they're relatively minor in the overall plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. A couple of questions, and I will keep them very quick. Hopefully, they're just yes, no's. In terms of it's not spoken to in the report, but when the work is underway, is access to the businesses going to be maintained?
Mr. Haran.
Yes, Your Worship, that's the plan. It might need to be, there will need to be some creative detouring, I think the word is. There will be some times where certain, where locals will have to cross to the other side of the street to get past the work that's going on. So we definitely need to manage it day by day. But it won't be easy, but it's not that the advantage there is we are sensitive to minimize the impacts to residents that just want to pass by, and also to businesses that are depending on foot traffic to do their day-to-day.
Councillor Appleton.
Thank you. So through you to staff, just to pick up on that, that's going to include the detour, quote unquote, will take into account people who are mobility limited or people who are just going to have trouble getting around on their own. I'm going to assume that however we detour, people will kind of accommodate that.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Mr. Haran.
Yes, indeed, that is part of the plan, and that's also in terms of this project as a whole is part of our outcome, is just to make the Oak Bay Avenue sidewalks more passable and flatter, and easier to use for all users.
Thank you. And again, through you, Your Worship, have we had contact with the adjacent private property owners, and have they provided any feedback on the work to be undertaken? Yeah.
Mr. Haran, either in 2020 or more recently?
Yes, Your Worship. In terms of more recently, the business owners were all aware, as we were doing the work in terms of removing the trees, like the actual tree removal part, and we were just about to provide some more detail about when we were starting and what it would look like. This is in early January when we were trying to decide when is a good time to start. So initially we decided we were going to do it in November, and we thought, well, why don't we wait until after Christmas season is over? So I think they're aware because they know that they've seen the work that's going on, but we haven't done the actual construction notices yet because we're still kind of waiting on when do we get the go on doing it, or the no-go, and then deciding, well, what does that mean if we have a no-go, and what will we do instead? So I think they're aware, but we have more formal communications that needs to go out as soon as we have a way ahead determined.
I appreciate that information, and I should clarify what I was actually, and that's valuable information to know as far as the tenants. I was actually referring to the landowners themselves, the building owners, and the folks that actually own the land that might be affected by the work. Which actually relates to a follow-up question I had, which is there a plan long-term to secure a right-of-way through this process, that there might be a right-of-way put into place? So I'm just wondering whether the actual landowners who own the property being affected had anything to say about it, and whether or not we would seek a right-of-way.
Mr. Haran.
Yes, Your Worship, that's an excellent question. I haven't personally done that work, so I think the assumption, I'll have to go with the assumption that they are not fully aware of the details of what's happening right now. So that will be part of our next steps in terms of disclosing the project plans, and then highlighting the longer term work that has to happen that's mentioned in the report, which is around what's the final outcome meant to be in terms of maintenance in the area for the public realm space, but then also potential development of a future rights of way, or whatever the long-term solution is. So there are still some unknowns here. And I think the key here is we were just, because of the public health impact, we are trying to move quickly so that at least we have some a way forward to fix the issue as soon as we can, without negatively impacting the business owners this summer.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you for the comments from the various councillors around this. A little bit like Councillor Patterson, and I guess alluded to by Councillor Appleton, I'm a bit uncomfortable at the historical practice for this particular thing, as referenced in the report. I don't want to ask about legal advice, and I certainly don't want to ask about anything that may touch upon liability. But those sorts of things concern me with respect to our historical practice. I do recall a conversation a few years ago with our previous CAO and Director of Engineering about some tripping hazards that need to be fixed up in I think in the Estevan area. And I was told that Oak could not do anything to do with that public realm space on Estevan sidewalks because it was private land. And I understand those tripping hazards are still there on the private land portion of the public realm on Estevan. I don't see how this is different. And let me just pause there for a minute and ask, how is it different other than maybe a desire to do something quickly? What's different about this, say, than Estevan or any other place that has private lands with tripping hazards?
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. I don't know if Mr. Van is able to answer that question or not, but we'll go to him just in case.
Yes, thank you for the question, Your Worship. I think the best way to look at this is, yes, I can confirm that Estevan Village has a similar challenge where what the community sees, probably assumes is public space, is a lot less public space and a lot more private space than anticipated. And I think that happens in many municipalities. But I can confirm that there are some issues happening in Estevan Village that are on the private property side of that line. But I think the key there is, and the big focus is that Councillor Zelka's question is the previous discussions with previous CAO and previous Director of Engineering, is that it was very clear where the property line was and where the boundaries are and what the issues are there. So that's part of that's known and understood. What's challenging here is that as a practice, whether it's the business owners themselves, the property owners themselves, the municipality in planting the trees in the first place, and then all of the maintenance staff that have been doing the work along the way, have been doing all this good work to keep people safe, but then there's a behind the scenes kind of snag, which is it's right along the property line. So with good intentions and doing the right thing to keep people from tripping and falling unnecessarily and hurting themselves, there's actually, that's a good thing, but maybe a different path would have been the best way forward. So now that we've discovered this issue, we have a way forward. I think we need to still do the right thing in terms of keeping people safe, but then we have a longer term plan to address the issues of what the longer term future looks like.
Thanks, Mr. Fran. Ms. Rella, you wanted to add something to this conversation?
Thank you, Your Worship. So for greater clarity, it was the topographical survey that was recently undertaken that confirmed the mix of public-private. So once that was known, which was a new discovery for the avenue, that's why we're bringing the issue before council. So the area has long been maintained, construction work has long been carried out there. Certainly we will have to have discussions with those property owners, but in the meantime, we have a historical practice of treating that area as public realm right until we did the survey recently and discovered otherwise.
Thank you, Ms. Rella. Councillor Zelka, anything else?
Yes, one more thing, if I may. I very much appreciate that it is a public realm, and of course the public often doesn't know where that line is. And I see other local authorities have public realm plans, most likely with public landowners heavily involved with that process. And I'm sure at some point our area plans will evolve and mature to include a more formal public realm plan. I'm just assuming that would make sense, that we would eventually go there. So with that opening comment, I'm still uncomfortable with the possible legal aspects of this. I hear staff wants to try and get something done maybe by the end of May. So I would like to ask that this be referred or excuse me, sent back to staff, asking for a legal opinion as to whether we should need to proceed on these right-of-way agreements sooner instead of later. And if it is sooner, then of course that would come back to probably a closed meeting as a result.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Ms. Rell, I just want to make sure we're following an appropriate process here for going away just to seek advice that needs to go in camera in a public meeting. What is some appropriate wording here, if in the motion, and some limits on our discussion on this topic as well?
Your Worship, I would almost treat the establishment of right-of-ways as an operational matter that staff knows they have to proceed with, and the best process forward with that. The report is before council to say, do you want us to do this work in the public realm that is a mix of public and private lands without those right-of-ways in place? If the answer is no, then the project is delayed. We continue solving the problem. If you say yes, continue with the work, we still go on to solve the problem.
I think the question here is, maybe just for clarification, what work would happen if approved as is with the landowners and the businesses to get approval or as part of a process?
Your Worship, there would be negotiations for the right-of-way or other steps that perhaps staff could have greater discussion on. I'm likely more in a closed meeting, but again, this is the focus of, do you want to continue with the work in the absence of those agreements? We know we have to deal with this mix of public and private lands. That's a separate issue, as Councillor Patterson had alluded to, that we know we have to deal with at an operational level. In the absence of those agreements, does council want us to continue with work on the avenue?
Thank you, Ms. Rella. Councillor, you had still the floor, Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so that is the essence of it. I understand there's some sensitivities here. I don't want to get into the sensitive areas, but I am uncomfortable continuing with the historical practice in this case. So as our CAO pointed out, if this body is being asked to give permission or give our endorsement for staff to continue the historical practice, which is possibly suspect, I don't know. I'd have to say, for me, I will say no.
Thanks, Councillor Zelka. Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you. I'm actually comfortable with the staff report the way it stands. I'm comfortable with staff dealing with those other issues after they've dealt with what's happening on the avenue. We need to get the avenue fixed. We need to get it fixed quickly before the summer, in my humble opinion. And yes, it's important that we know. It's important in the future that we have that delineation between public and private. But for now, I think based on what I've read in the staff report, I would feel comfortable putting forward the recommendations at the right time as written out in the staff report.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Councillor Patterson.
And I have to speak against this. I'm sorry, I cannot support it. I did for many years of my career represent a national body, an international body that advocated for private property rights. And so without some authority by which we can move forward, either to mitigate a hazardous condition, that we have a responsibility and duty to remove the hazardous condition, or to, in fact, have some notification and agreement from owners. I can't support it as written. It just it goes against everything that I spent years working towards. So I can't support it as it stands. Thank you.
Councillor Patterson. I'll point out there is no actual motion on the table at the moment. We're just talking to the report. But I appreciate the comments are clear anyway. Just want to remind people we don't have a motion yet. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I'm going to ask this question, although I'm of staff, although I suspect that they probably can't answer it, but I will put it out there anyway. What seems to be at issue here is the historical management of the area, which is based on sort of historical practice and is not clearly defined. And then obviously the ideal situation would be for there to be a legal right of way and a clarification of the lot line such that the district could do the work within that right of way and essentially proceed unencumbered as it would typically be with most types of infrastructure. What I'm interested in is to expedite the matter, knowing that the securing of the right of way is going to be a long-term process, is a long involved process. To expedite the matter, is there some type of, for want of a better word, interim or short-term legal agreement that can be established with the private landowner in order to do this very focused set of work with the understanding that the right-of-way might come afterwards?
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. I'm not sure who on staff would be comfortable or able to answer that question in terms of a process, but I'm going to go to you, Ms. Varela, to start with.
Thank you, Your Worship. So any formal agreement is going to have a time impact, of course. You're going to be dealing with multiple property owners who probably have assumed that the majority, if not all of that property is actually municipal lands. Where the hazards exist or potential hazards exist are both on the public and private property. So again, that is an issue for property owners. Certainly we'll be reaching out in the immediate short term based on council direction. The way we reach out or what we reach out about is determined by council's approach tonight. So we know this has to be addressed. We'll be working cooperatively with that. There are a variety of approaches we could take, and that will take research and time. So again, if council chooses to wait until those agreements are in place, we can adjust the timeline of the project accordingly, and the avenue will stay as is for the time being.
So I just two aspects of procedure here. First, most importantly, and I apologize that we keep doing this, but I'm going to ask that we have a motion to extend the meeting to, I'd say, 9:45. I think we really have to wrap things up by then. Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion on that? All those in favor? Any opposed? Everybody's opposed, but nobody's voting that way. So let's move this along. The second piece of this, I think, if the majority of council is comfortable with this, it'll move forward as is. If not, I think with a motion, Ms. Rella, to refer this to a future council meeting to give the staff some time to reach out to the homeowners for to clarify rights of access in the intervening time. Would that be an appropriate piece of this if there isn't comfort level here right now?
Yes, Your Worship, it would be. I think we'll be undertaking that anyway, based on council's direction. But if the intention is to reach out to them to say, we'd like to do this work, we now recognize this is a mix of public-private property. That private property that is public realm space is in a state of disrepair. It will impact timelines. I can't guarantee what that looks like, but we can come back to you.
Thanks, Ms. Rella. Councillor Braithwaite.
Yeah, I'll put the motion on the floor as per the staff recommendations, all of the recommendations listed there.
I'll second it.
Moved and seconded. Is there any other discussion?
Just myself, I appreciate the concerns around the legal issues, but I have to say, I'm confident staff's going to move forward with that. And I think this just needs to get done. It's a mess there. And I don't see the risk outweighs the issue of timeless and moving this forward. So I'm speaking in favor of the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Nay. Councillor, go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite, you wanted to add something?
Sorry, yeah, I just want to say I would agree with everything Councillor Nay said, and I also think that we have to be really cognizant of the businesses along the avenue right there. We don't want to delay this for them into the summer when COVID restrictions could be lifted to a certain extent, and that might impact their business. And I would hate to see us impact the business along that area any more than what we already have.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. I have Councillor Green, then Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And I will support the motion as well, speaking in support. And I think because I feel the greater risk right now is public safety, and there could be further legal ramifications if someone falls there again. And I know Councillor Patterson fell in that area last year. So I think it's, I trust staff to pursue the legal angles. And while I appreciate the concerns around the legal angles, I think the public safety issue is far more compelling. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Mayor. And I appreciate the comments around the council table. I understand them. As Councillor Green said, I experienced a fall myself, so I understand that. However, I think that the situation we're making a major situation out of something that is, I don't necessarily see as a major situation by getting agreement from the building owners, because in fact, both parties have a hazardous situation that needs to be correct, and in identifying that, they should promptly agree to allow us to mitigate that that risk, the danger. So, I don't think this is, you have to go out and resolve your right-of-way easements immediately. I think, yes, you have to respond to the situation. I just feel that there is a way of doing that is more in keeping with respecting the rights of both parties and dealing with the problem of both parties, because those private owners do also now have a risk on their property, and I'm sure they would want us to mitigate it. So rather than just working as we always have been, I think that this is an opportunity to learn something from this and move forward a little more nimbly to bring a resolution to this that is satisfactory to all parties. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. Speaking against the motion, I understand the exigency of getting this done in a timely fashion. I really do, and it brings me no joy to say it. But at this stage of the game, my level of comfort with not having a legal agreement in place with the adjacent landowners kind of exceeds my immediate concern about access to the avenue. So it like I say, it brings me no happiness to say that, and it's a tough decision to make. But at this stage of the game, I would like to see it referred back to staff to secure those legal agreements before proceeding. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Councillor Zelka.
Thank you very much. Last thing I'll say, speaking against the motion, is I wonder out loud, and I just don't need a comment from staff on this, but I do wonder out loud about the MIABC claims process now that we know where the lines are. And I know there's some tripping hazards, but sounds like some of them are not ours anymore. So thank you very much. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. From what the comments that have been made, I'm probably going to end up being the swing vote on here. I'm going to not support the motion. I think that we, hearing what everybody's raised as concerns here, there's no doubt in my mind that staff would go forward with every effort to inform. But my primary concern here is the as per historical practice, which is essentially just doing it. And I think that's the piece that I just want to make sure that we're informing the owners. And I agree with the comments that have been made. There is zero upside for business owners not to agree for us to pay for and deal with this issue. But I do think that we need to make that formal notification and ask before we do the work. And so if this fails, I think there needs to be another motion to approve this or to refer this back in some way with agreement in principle, but just seeking that approval before it begins. So in some wording that doesn't require it to come back to this table, but it can be approved subject to that agreement with the owners. So the motion on the table is as it's written on the in the package. So any other discussion before we call the question? Not seeing any. I'll call the question. All of those in favor? I have Nay, Green, Braithwaite in favor. Those opposed? Appleton, Patterson, Zelka, and Mayor Murdoch opposed. So that motion fails. Ms. Varela, can I just ask, is there a motion that we can make here that would incline that this would, subject to agreement with the landowners, that this can move forward without having to come back to this table again?
Your worship, staff can consider this operationalized at this point. We will be reaching out to the property owners, which we would have done anyway, of course. But again, this will affect timelines, and we will advise council of what that looks like.
That'd be great if you could do that. I think if there's any significant impacts on that front, then that has to come back to this table again. So there's no motion required then to undertake that?
No, your worship, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, I think that's good. Thank you. And then we have up number 3.3, Esplanade at Willows Beach parking. Another interesting and a little bit complicated one, but I will turn to Mr. Haran. I'm assuming again would be your area, or Mr. Brozick?
Yes, Your Worship, that'll be me that does a little quick intro here. It's a more straightforward report, so I'll be brief. This report is just seeking some direction from council related to the question of whether or not to restrict the Esplanade to local traffic only, or to maintain the status quo of no parking restrictions along the Esplanade. So these restrictions that we are proposing and recommending are tied to the current state of the pandemic response in the region, and is meant to be tied to the need to create some opportunities to enable social distancing and safe walking spaces for pedestrians down at Willows Beach along the Esplanade. There's in the report some discussion of the closure that occurred last year and how those restrictions were then lifted. And then the staff recommendation is tied to the idea that the pandemic situation is more severe at the current moment, and that the recommendation is to tie these restrictions to the provincial health officers' direction around indoor dining in the region as an indicator of the severity of the pandemic in this area, and that these restrictions be lifted only when those indoor dining restrictions and likely many others have been lifted. That's the introduction to the report.
Thank you, Mr. Haran. I'm going to ask a question at the top, because I just rereading that now. I assume that those dining restrictions being the current ones, which allow no inside dining restrictions, or is that intention of that it be in place until there are no internal dining restrictions? Because for a long time there, they were restricted to say 50% capacity. Could we just be a little bit clearer about what that dining restrictions refers to?
Yes, Your Worship, the restrictions are meant to be as they are right now at the moment. And I think if we recall that last year, in March, when the Emergency Operations Center was stood up, many of the decisions about restrictions and closures was done at the operational level by the Emergency Operations Center, because there was meant to be actions taken quickly without time to go to the governance level in terms of council meetings. And there was discussion about how that was going to be done. But now the sense of urgency is not quite as there. So that's why we're coming to seek a direction from council. But the idea here now is to tie it to indoor dining is not allowed at the moment. And as the situation changes, so if the restrictions are lifted or things change, the EOC would look at the situation and go, okay, have things changed enough that it's time to change what's happening at Willows Beach and the Esplanade, or is it getting worse, or what's the to make that call at that level? But we're just seeking some higher level kind of intent on whether the changes need to happen, or whether the council would like to see things remain as they currently are.
Thank you for that clarification. Councillor Zelka, then Councillor Patterson.
Thank you very much, Chair. Through you to staff. I understand the EOC and the various ministerial orders that are in place with the current state of emergency basically gives the EOC authorization now, as they did early last year, to simply just do this, since they have that authority at the operational level. I appreciate that staff is wanting to come back to council, since maybe it doesn't seem as much of an emergency, although we are still in an official state of emergency. I support staff. If they think they should do this, they should just do this, since they have the authority to just do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Councillor Patterson, then Councillor Appleton. Oh, sorry, Ms. Varela, you have your hand up?
Certainly, Your Worship. Just speaking as the EOC director, because we actually have the luxury of time right now before the weather heats up and all of that to bring this forward as a governance matter, that's really why we're treating it as a request for direction from council.
Thank you, Ms. Varela. Councillor Patterson, then Councillor Appleton.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. At this point in time, the Esplanade north of Estevan, the traffic is predominantly construction vehicles during the week for the large construction project that's going on there. So there really isn't potential to restrict that section of the roadway while that build is going on. So I'm not understanding if that was not to be part of it at this time, or it's something that perhaps we didn't identify. Yeah, it's pretty blocked off with construction vehicles right now. And in fact, they use cones to mark out all of the rest of the parking spots so that they have lots of access for parking. So I don't know what plans there are to manage that, and perhaps staff can speak to it.
Sure. Maybe a level of detail we don't need to get into entirely, but Mr. Haran, do you want to talk to that?
Yeah, absolutely, Your Worship. I think it's a good question, and I think what we will want to focus on is the outcomes that we're seeking, and not necessarily the how to make it happen. So what we're really saying here is, particularly on weekends when the demand is very high for that region, what we're trying to do is make it so that all of the parking spaces along the Esplanade are not full. So then as people are trying to walk down the sidewalk along Willows Beach, they're not required to step into traffic or around parked cars to try to keep distance from each other. So that does allow for local traffic in that region, and it allows for exceptions for things like, well, if there's construction happening at a specific residence, that can happen without negating the outcome that we're seeking in terms of allowing distancing, particularly on the weekends when it's the busiest.
Thank you, Mr. Haran. Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship. And with the idea that the traffic, well, I guess what I should first ask is that the intent is to essentially retain the same amount of parking spots that are there, but to have more of them open. Is that kind of the general read on things?
Mr. Haran.
Through Your Worship, I'm sorry, I actually didn't understand the question. Could you repeat the question?
Well, what I mean by that is that the restriction to local traffic only is intended to have the outcome that more of the parking spots will be unoccupied during the course of the day, and that the intent isn't to remove any parking spots.
Oh, no, actually, Your Worship, that's the opposite. What we're intending to do is like we did last year in April and early May, which is to restrict traffic on the Esplanade to local traffic only and close all the public parking spaces with cones and barriers, which would be essentially doubling the width of the sidewalk. So there's no parked cars there anymore. So essentially no more parking on Esplanade unless you live there.
Okay, that's great. Thanks for that. And I apologize. Maybe I just missed that point in the report. With the restriction on parking and with the reduction in parking availability, and with us wanting to make it accessible and easy to get to the beach on nice days for local folks who might otherwise drive, I'm wondering about the provision of additional parking spots for active transportation, and I'm wanting to know whether or not there's an opportunity to expand bicycle parking, and what options we have in that regard, and just whether or not we might be able to bring a separate motion to the council table to provide some resources for short-term additions to bike parking.
Mr. Haran. I think that would be well supported by the council. And I have in my notes here probably maybe a couple of additional mobility for handicap parking as well in that parking lot, because there's going to be more pressure there and harder for people with mobility issues to park close. I'm just wondering if we really want that as part of the motion, or if we can give some general direction to look at the broader transportation issues around there and do that, or if since it might have a cost attached to it, do you want some direction from council?
Yeah, exactly.
Mr. Haran?
That's a good question. You have me thinking. I guess what I would need is more clarity on outcomes. So like there's a couple of ideas that have been floated here, and they're good ideas. But I think that the question about cost or level of effort to implement them, it really depends on what we're seeking. So if the one way to do this would be just to direct us to not necessarily with a motion, but direct us to go have a think and come back with some options. So that's one way to do it. So we can kind of establish what we might do. Things like temporarily changing parking spots in Willow's parking lot in terms of disabled parking is very easy to do. So that's very straightforward. But in terms of additional active transportation parking spots, it might take a little bit more effort. But I guess what I'm saying is either more clarity or direct us to do some offline thinking and come back to the table with some ideas.
Thank you, Mr. Rand. I think just in the interest of time, I have a suggestion that we could make the motion and amend it to include, and the staff be directed to bring back options to support active transportation and storage at Willows. That's just a general, and that would allow for staff to go away and come back with some options for that. And if there's cost, then we could approve those. And if there's not, then it would essentially just go. Is that a reasonable approach? Seeing some generally nodding heads. So, okay. Councillor Appleton.
Yeah, I would approve of that approach, Your Worship. I guess what I'm looking for is potentially almost a per unit cost if we were going to convert some appropriate parking spots along the Esplanade on a temporary basis while it's closed to traffic to include bicycle racks and bicycle storage. What would that cost, and can we evaluate that? So, to expand by 12 or 24 or 36 additional spots, well, what is the per unit cost almost for when you trade away a parking spot for additional bike parking?
Thanks, Councillor Appleton. I think that's great. Councillor Braithwaite.
Yeah, just really quickly, and perhaps staff would know the answer to this. And when we did this, I live very close to that area, right beside that area. So I understand what closing the parking on the Esplanade does. I'm in agreement that we should close it, but I'm just wondering what then happens to Beach Drive, which will then become quite crowded, and parts of Estevan as well, and even up to Lincoln, etc. And Beach Drive is the street that I worry about the most because it is so narrow anyhow, and we have so much traffic down there, especially on the weekends when it's nice. So I'm wondering if we're pushing the parking out to Beach Drive, then is there something that we might have to do to mitigate people only parking on one side of the street or something like that? And I'm not asking for an answer tonight. It might be just something that staff can think about and see if there's going to be, if they think there might be any issues with that.
Okay. I think staff can take that away. Can we put a motion on the floor then for discussion, Councillor Nay?
Yeah, I'll put a motion on. I'll move the staff recommendation for option 1 and add to that staff also be directed to bring forward some options to increase active transportation parking.
Moved and seconded. Thank you. Is there any other discussion on that? Councillor Zelka?
Thank you. I'm sure since this is related in some ways to the EOC, if any of these charges can be charged back under what I think it's called a task number to the province, that would be fantastic. But I'm sure staff will be exploring that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. Always looking out for our financials. I appreciate that. Any other discussion on this motion? Not seeing any. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. That's great. Thank you. And with that, we just need a motion to adjourn.
Move adjournment.
Moved and seconded. Thank you very much. Have a great night, everybody. All those in favor? Any opposed? Nobody opposed. Have a great night.